Picture this. You're standing in front of a mirror, but instead of seeing your reflection, you see a question that dissolves everything you thought you knew about reality. What if trying to be happy makes you miserable? What if your friends really do have more friends than you? What if saving money could destroy the economy? What if being perfectly tolerant requires intolerance? These aren't riddles or clever wordplay. They're paradoxes, logical contradictions that reveal the hidden cracks in our understanding of the world. They're the places where common sense breaks down and something far more interesting begins. For thousands of years, the greatest minds in human history have wrestled with these impossible puzzles. Not because they wanted to win debates or show off their intelligence, but because buried within each contradiction lies a profound truth about how reality actually works. A crocodile that traps you in circular logic teaches you about power and control. A quantum cat that's simultaneously alive and dead reveals the strange nature of observation itself. A hotel with infinite rooms shows you that infinity doesn't behave like anything else in the universe. These paradoxes aren't just intellectual curiosities, they're mirrors that reflect back the deepest patterns of existence. Patterns that govern everything from quantum particles to human relationships, from ancient civilizations to modern democracies. Tonight, as you encounter each mind-bending contradiction, you'll discover that the most profound insights don't come from resolving paradoxes. They come from learning to live with them, from understanding that contradiction isn't the enemy of truth, it's the gateway to deeper wisdom. Ready to have your mind transformed? The crocodile paradox. Picture this. You're standing at the muddy banks of an ancient river, your heart hammering against your ribs as you stare into the cold, reptilian eyes of a creature that has survived since the age of dinosaurs. The crocodile has your child in its powerful jaws, but instead of simply devouring its prey, it speaks with the voice of ancient wisdom itself. "I will return your child," the crocodile declares, its voice carrying the weight of primordial law, "if and only if you can correctly predict what I will do next." Time freezes. The world holds its breath. You realize with growing horror that this isn't just a life or death situation. It's a trap woven from the very fabric of logic itself. No matter what you answer, you're walking into a paradox that has no escape. This is the crocodile paradox, and it's about to teach you something profound about the nature of promises, truth, and the terrifying power of self-referential logic. Let's trace the deadly logic step by step. You have two possible answers, and both lead to impossible conclusions. You look the crocodile in the eye and declare, "You will return my child." If the crocodile intended to return your child, then your prediction is correct. The crocodile must honor its word. After all, you've successfully guessed its intention. Your child is safe, your gamble has paid off, and logic remains intact. This scenario at least makes sense. But what if the crocodile planned to keep your child? Now, your prediction is wrong. According to the terms of the deal, a wrong prediction means the crocodile has no obligation to return your child. The beast keeps its word by doing exactly what it intended, keeping your child. Again, everything remains logically consistent. Now comes the real trap. What if you look into those ancient eyes and say, "You will not return my child"? If the crocodile planned to keep your child, your prediction is correct. But here's where logic begins to eat its own tail. Because your prediction is correct, the crocodile must return your child according to the original deal. Yet, if the crocodile returns your child, it contradicts your prediction, which means your prediction was wrong. And if your prediction was wrong, the crocodile has no obligation to return your child. On the other hand, if the crocodile intended to return your child, your prediction is wrong. This means the crocodile doesn't have to return your child. But by not returning your child, the crocodile makes your prediction correct, which means it should return your child after all. The crocodile has created a logical prison with no exit. No matter what it does, it contradicts itself. No matter what you predict, you create an impossibility. This isn't just a clever puzzle about reptilian philosophers. The crocodile paradox reveals something profound about the structure of language and logic itself. It belongs to a family of paradoxes known as self-referential paradoxes. statements that create contradictions by referring to themselves. Think of the famous liar's paradox. This statement is false. If it's true, then it must be false. If it's false, then it must be true. The statement devours itself like a logical Ouroboros, the ancient symbol of a serpent eating its own tail. The crocodile's promise creates the same impossible loop. The promise's terms depend on your prediction, but your prediction can change the very outcome the promise describes. It's like trying to step into the same river twice, while the river itself changes based on where you plan to step. The crocodile paradox isn't just an ancient riddle. It's a mirror reflecting the paradoxes we encounter in our everyday lives. Legal documents often contain clauses that contradict themselves when examined closely. A contract might state that it becomes void if certain conditions are met, but meeting those conditions requires the contract to be valid in the first place. Politicians frequently make promises that create logical impossibilities. I promise to reduce government interference in your lives by passing more laws to ensure your freedom. The very act of legislating freedom can limit it. We create crocodile paradoxes in our own relationships. I'll trust you if you prove you're trustworthy, but proving trustworthiness often requires trust to begin with. The crocodile in this story isn't just a passive participant in the paradox, it's the architect of the trap. This reveals something crucial about power and control. The paradox demonstrates how authority figures can use logical contradictions to maintain dominance. By setting up rules that guarantee contradiction, the crocodile ensures that no answer can fully satisfy the agreement. This is the hallmark of oppressive systems throughout history. Create conditions where compliance is impossible, then use that impossibility as justification for whatever action serves those in power. The crocodile represents any system, bureaucratic, political, or social, that uses the illusion of choice to mask the reality of control. You're free to choose, the system says, but every choice leads back to where we want you. So what can we learn from our encounter with the crocodile? First, the paradox teaches us to recognize logical traps before we step into them. When someone offers you a deal that seems too complex or creates unusual conditions, ask yourself, am I being led into a crocodile paradox? Second, it reveals the limits of pure logic. Logic is a powerful tool, but when it turns in on itself, it can create prisons as confining as any physical cage. The most sophisticated reasoning can lead to the most impossible conclusions. Third, the paradox shows us that some problems aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be understood. The crocodile paradox does not have a resolution because it's not really about the crocodile or the child or the prediction. It's about recognizing the moment when the rules of the game are designed to make winning impossible. Perhaps the real lesson of the crocodile paradox is this: sometimes the only winning move is not to play. When faced with a system designed to trap you in contradiction, the wisest response might be to reject the system entirely. The crocodile offers you a choice between two answers, but what if there's a third option? What if you simply refuse to engage with the paradox? What if you recognize that the crocodile's promise is fundamentally flawed and therefore invalid? This is the paradox's greatest gift. It teaches us to think beyond the boundaries others set for us. When someone presents you with a false dilemma, a choice between two equally impossible options, remember the crocodile. Remember that the most powerful response to a rigged game is often to walk away and find a different game entirely. As you move forward in life, carry this wisdom with you. When you encounter your own crocodiles, systems, people, or situations that try to trap you in logical impossibilities, remember that recognizing the trap is often more valuable than solving the puzzle. The crocodile's eyes glitter with ancient knowledge, but they also reflect a simple truth. Not every question deserves an answer, and not every choice deserves to be made. Sometimes the greatest wisdom lies in understanding why a problem exists, rather than trying to solve it. In the end, the crocodile paradox isn't about crocodiles at all. It's about the moment when you realize that the most dangerous predators don't just threaten your body. They threaten your mind with impossible choices that lead nowhere, but deeper into their domain. The wise traveler learns to recognize these predators and walks a different path entirely. The card paradox picture. A simple playing card with writing on both sides. On one side, it says, "The statement on the other side of this card is true." You flip it over, and the other side says, "The statement on the other side of this card is false." You're holding what seems like an innocent piece of cardboard, but you've actually grasped one of the most mind-bending logical puzzles ever conceived. This is the card paradox, and it's about to demonstrate how easily language can tie itself into knots that no amount of careful thinking can untangle. The paradox belongs to a family of self-referential puzzles that reveal fundamental limitations in our logical systems and perhaps in human reasoning itself. Let's trace through the logical trap step by step. If the statement on side 1 is true, then it correctly claims that the statement on side 2 is true. But side 2 says that the statement on side 1 is false. So if side 1 is true, then side 2, which says side 1 is false, must also be true. But this creates a contradiction. Side 1 cannot be both true and false simultaneously. Now let's try the opposite approach. Suppose the statement on side 1 is false. This means its claim that side 2 is true must be incorrect, so side 2 must be false. But side 2 claims that side 1 is false, which we're supposing is correct. So if side 1 is false, then side 2's claim about side 1 being false should be true. But we just concluded that side 2 must be false if side 1 is false. No matter which direction you approach this puzzle, you end up in logical quicksand. The statements chase each other in an endless circle of contradiction, with each side's truth depending on the other's falsity, creating an impossible logical loop. This isn't just a clever word game or an amusing puzzle. The card paradox reveals something deeply troubling about the nature of language, logic, and meaning. It shows how easily our most basic tools for reasoning can break down when they encounter self-reference. The paradox is closely related to the famous liar's paradox, where someone says, "This statement is false." But the card paradox makes the problem even more vivid by spreading the contradiction across two statements that refer to each other rather than having a single statement refer to itself. This external reference creates the illusion that we might be able to solve the puzzle by carefully analyzing each statement separately. But the interdependence of the statements means that neither can be evaluated independently of the other. They're locked together in a logical embrace that becomes a logical death spiral. The card paradox demonstrates what logicians call the problem of self-reference. When systems of reasoning refer back to themselves, they can create paradoxes that have no resolution within the system's own rules. The statements on the card create what's essentially a logical short circuit. This has profound implications for how we think about truth, language, and reasoning. If simple statements in plain English can create unsolvable contradictions, what does this tell us about the reliability of language as a tool for discovering and expressing truth? The paradox also highlights the difference between formal logic and natural language. In formal logical systems, statements are either true or false, and contradictions indicate errors that must be resolved. But natural language allows for ambiguity, context dependence, and self-reference that can create situations where formal logical rules break down. One approach to resolving paradoxes like this is to declare them meaningless rather than false. If a statement creates an irresolvable contradiction, perhaps it's not really a statement at all, but a string of words that looks like a statement without actually having truth value. This solution preserves logical consistency by excluding paradoxical statements from the domain of meaningful discourse. But it raises troubling questions about how we determine which statements are meaningful and which are merely apparent statements that create logical problems. Another approach is to abandon the assumption that every statement must be either true or false. Perhaps paradoxical statements occupy a third category, neither true nor false, but something else entirely. This requires restructuring our entire understanding of truth and logic to accommodate paradoxical cases. Some philosophers have suggested that paradoxes like the card paradox reveal the inherent limitations of any logical system. Kurt Gödel's famous incompleteness theorems proved that sufficiently complex formal systems must contain statements that cannot be proven true or false within the system itself. The card paradox can be seen as an informal version of this deeper mathematical truth. It shows that even simple language can create statements that resist logical resolution, suggesting that complete logical consistency might be impossible for any rich system of reasoning. The paradox also has implications for computer science and artificial intelligence. Computer programs that process natural language must somehow deal with paradoxical statements that could potentially crash systems designed to determine truth values automatically. This challenge reveals the gap between formal computational systems and the messy complexity of human language and reasoning. While computers excel at formal logic, they struggle with the ambiguities and paradoxes that humans navigate intuitively, if not always successfully. In daily life, the card paradox serves as a reminder to be cautious about statements that seem to prove too much or create circular dependencies. When someone makes claims that depend entirely on the truth of other claims that depend entirely on the first claims, you might be encountering a real-world version of the card paradox. Political rhetoric often contains elements of circular reasoning that mirror the structure of logical paradoxes. Candidates might claim their policies are good because they lead to outcomes that are good because they result from good policies. While not necessarily paradoxical, such reasoning shares the problematic structure of self-referential justification. The paradox also illuminates the challenge of self-assessment and self-knowledge. When we try to evaluate our own reasoning or judge our own character, we create potential self-referential loops that can lead to confusion or contradiction. The tool we use for evaluation, our own mind, is also the object being evaluated. Understanding the card paradox can help develop intellectual humility about the limitations of reasoning and language. It reminds us that even careful logical thinking can encounter problems that have no clear solutions within the framework of logic itself. This doesn't mean abandoning logic or reasoning, but rather recognizing their boundaries and limitations. The most sophisticated systems of thought, like the most elegant languages, can create paradoxes that resist resolution through more of the same thinking that created them. The card paradox ultimately teaches us that meaning and truth are more complex and fragile than they initially appear. Simple statements in everyday language can harbor deep logical problems that challenge our most basic assumptions about reasoning and communication. Perhaps the paradox's greatest value is not in its resolution, but in its demonstration that mystery and contradiction are not bugs in human reasoning, but fundamental features of any rich system of language and thought. The card paradox reminds us that some questions don't have answers, some problems don't have solutions, and some statements resist classification as either true or false. In a world that often demands simple answers to complex questions, the card paradox stands as a reminder that reality, language, and logic are more subtle and mysterious than they appear. Sometimes the most profound insights come not from solving puzzles, but from learning to live with their unsolvability. The card sits there innocently, but it carries within its simple statements a reminder that human reasoning, for all its power and elegance, contains depths of mystery that continue to challenge our understanding of truth, language, and meaning itself. The paradox of the raven. If all ravens are black, then observing a green apple should provide evidence for this claim. This statement sounds absurd, but it follows logically from one of the most important principles in scientific reasoning. Welcome to the paradox of the raven, a puzzle that challenges everything we think we know about evidence, observation, and the process of scientific discovery. The paradox begins with a simple statement that seems obviously true. All ravens are black. In logic, this statement is equivalent to its contrapositive. If something is not black, then it is not a raven. These two statements mean exactly the same thing. They're logically interchangeable. Now comes the strange part. If you want to find evidence that all ravens are black, the obvious approach is to observe ravens and check their color. Every black raven you see confirms your hypothesis. This seems straightforward and sensible. But according to the rules of logic, observing a non-black, non-raven should provide exactly the same type of evidence. A green apple, for instance, is both non-black and non-raven, which fits perfectly with the contrapositive statement. If all ravens are black, then all non-black things should indeed be non-ravens. So here's the paradox. Sitting in your kitchen, observing green apples, you are supposedly gathering evidence about ravens, even though you've never seen a raven in your life. Every green apple confirms that non-black things are non-ravens, which is logically equivalent to confirming that all ravens are black. This feels wrong. How can looking at an apple tell you anything meaningful about ravens? The paradox exposes a troubling gap between formal logic and intuitive reasoning about evidence and knowledge. The paradox was first articulated by philosopher Carl Gustav Hempel in the 1940s, and it has puzzled logicians, scientists, and philosophers ever since. It reveals fundamental questions about how evidence works, what counts as confirmation, and whether logical equivalence translates into evidential equivalence. Our intuition rebels against the idea that observing apples provides evidence about ravens because it seems to violate the principle of relevance. Evidence should be relevant to the hypothesis being tested. Ravens seem relevant to claims about ravens, apples do not. But logic insists that if two statements are equivalent, then evidence for one must also be evidence for the other. The paradox forces us to choose between our intuitive understanding of relevance and the formal requirements of logical consistency. One way to resolve the paradox is to examine what we mean by evidence and confirmation. In the real world, we don't evaluate evidence in isolation. We consider background knowledge, the context of observation, and the informativeness of different types of evidence. Observing a black raven provides strong evidence for the hypothesis because ravens are relatively rare, and finding one that fits the predicted pattern is informative. Observing a green apple provides much weaker evidence because apples are common, and their color has no obvious connection to bird coloration. This suggests that logical equivalence doesn't necessarily imply evidential equivalence. Two statements might be logically identical, while differing dramatically in their empirical informativeness or practical relevance. The paradox also highlights the problem of induction, the challenge of generalizing from specific observations to universal statements. No finite number of observations can prove that all ravens are black, because there might always be a non-black raven we haven't seen yet. This limitation applies whether we're observing ravens directly or apples indirectly. The logical structure of the evidence is the same, but the practical constraints and background assumptions differ dramatically. Another resolution focuses on the difference between confirming and supporting a hypothesis. Perhaps observing green apples does logically confirm the raven hypothesis, but only in a trivial way that provides no practical support for believing it. This distinction reflects the difference between formal confirmation in logical systems and evidential support in real-world reasoning. Logic provides precise rules for evaluating arguments, but practical reasoning requires additional considerations about informativeness, relevance, and background knowledge. The paradox of the raven also illuminates the role of expectations and prior knowledge in scientific reasoning. When we observe a black raven, we're not just collecting a data point. We're testing our understanding against a prediction derived from a hypothesis. The informativeness of this test depends on our prior expectations. If we already know that most ravens are black, observing another black raven provides less new information than if we had no prior knowledge about raven coloration. Similarly, observing a green apple provides virtually no new information about ravens because we already expect apples to be non-ravens regardless of their color. The observation fits our expectations so perfectly that it doesn't change our beliefs about anything. This suggests that good evidence should be surprising in some sense. It should test our hypotheses in ways that could potentially falsify them or provide new information that wasn't already expected. The paradox has practical implications for scientific methodology and experimental design. It warns against confusing logical validity with empirical informativeness. An observation might be logically relevant to a hypothesis while being practically useless for testing it. Effective scientific testing requires carefully designed experiments that maximize informativeness while minimizing irrelevant factors. This often means seeking observations that could potentially falsify hypotheses rather than merely confirm them. The paradox of the raven also connects to broader questions about the nature of scientific knowledge and the relationship between theory and observation. It reveals tensions between idealized logical systems and the messy realities of empirical research. In practice, scientists must navigate between logical rigor and practical judgment, using formal methods while remaining sensitive to context, background knowledge, and the goals of inquiry. The paradox reminds us that no mechanical application of logical rules can substitute for scientific wisdom and judgment. The paradox also has implications for everyday reasoning and decision-making. It warns against being misled by technically correct but practically irrelevant evidence. Not all confirmations are equally meaningful, and logical consistency doesn't guarantee practical wisdom. When evaluating claims and evidence in daily life, we need to consider not just whether observations logically support conclusions, but whether they provide meaningful information that should change our beliefs or actions. The paradox of the raven ultimately teaches us that the relationship between logic and evidence is more complex than it initially appears. Formal logical systems provide powerful tools for reasoning, but they must be supplemented with judgment about relevance, informativeness, and practical significance. The paradox doesn't invalidate logical reasoning or scientific methodology. Instead, it highlights the importance of understanding their limitations and complementing them with other forms of knowledge and judgment. Perhaps most importantly, the paradox reminds us to remain humble about the nature of evidence and knowledge. Even our most basic assumptions about how evidence works can harbor deep puzzles and counterintuitive implications. The next time you see a green apple or a black raven, remember that both observations are embedded in complex webs of assumption, expectation, and reasoning that shape their evidential significance. The paradox teaches us that understanding evidence requires not just logical skill, but wisdom about the subtle relationships between observation, theory, and knowledge. In the end, the paradox of the raven stands as a reminder that even in the age of scientific advancement, fundamental questions about reasoning and evidence remain open and challenging. It invites us to think more deeply about how we know what we know and why we believe what we believe. The Sorite's paradox. How many grains of sand make a pile? This seems like a simple question until you try to answer it. 1 grain certainly isn't a pile. Neither are 2 grains, or 3, or 10. But somewhere between 1 grain and 1,000,000 grains, a pile must emerge. The question is, where exactly? If you can't identify the precise moment when grains become a pile, how can you be sure piles exist at all? This is the Sorite's paradox, and it reveals something unsettling about the nature of language, categories, and reality itself. The word Sorites comes from the Greek word for heap, and the paradox has been tormenting philosophers since ancient times. It seems to prove that either heaps don't exist, which is obviously false, or that our logic is fundamentally flawed, which is disturbing. Here's how the paradox works. Start with the seemingly reasonable premise that 1 grain of sand is not a heap. Then accept the equally reasonable principle that removing 1 grain from a collection cannot transform a heap into a non-heap. If you have a heap and take away 1 grain, you still have a heap. Apply this principle repeatedly. If 1,000,000 grains make a heap, then 999 times 999 grains also make a heap. And 998 grains. And 997. Following this logic relentlessly leads to the conclusion that even 1 grain makes a heap, which contradicts our starting premise. The same logic works in reverse. If 1 grain doesn't make a heap, and adding 1 grain to a non-heap cannot create a heap, then no number of grains can ever form a heap. But this contradicts our everyday experience of seeing sand piles on beaches. The Sorite's paradox isn't just about sand. It applies to any concept with fuzzy boundaries. When does a person become bald? When does day become night? When does a child become an adult? When does a hill become a mountain? These questions reveal that many of our most basic categories are surprisingly fragile. We organize our experience using concepts like tall and short, hot and cold, rich and poor. But the Sorite's paradox suggests these categories might be logically incoherent. Consider baldness. A person with a full head of hair clearly isn't bald. A person with no hair clearly is bald. But what about someone who has lost half their hair? 3/4? 90%? At what exact point does non-baldness become baldness? If you can't identify that precise point, the Sorite's reasoning suggests either that baldness doesn't exist, which seems wrong, or that everyone is bald, which also seems wrong. The paradox traps us between obviously false conclusions. The paradox reveals the gap between the preciseness of logic and the fuzziness of natural language. Logic demands sharp boundaries, clear distinctions, and exact definitions. But human language evolved to deal with a world where most meaningful categories have fuzzy edges and gradual transitions. This creates problems when we try to apply logical reasoning to everyday concepts. The law must decide exactly when someone becomes an adult for voting purposes, even though maturity is obviously a gradual process. Medicine must define exact thresholds for disease diagnosis, even though health and illness exist on a spectrum. Different cultures and societies draw these arbitrary lines in different places, which reveals their artificiality. Some countries set the voting age at 18, others at 16 or 21. These differences highlight that the boundaries are human constructions rather than natural facts. The sorites paradox has inspired several philosophical solutions, each with its own implications and limitations. Some philosophers embrace the paradox and argue that most of our everyday concepts are indeed incoherent. They suggest we need to abandon fuzzy categories and think more precisely about the world. Others propose that we should accept degrees of truth rather than insisting on binary, true or false judgments. Maybe someone can be somewhat bald or partially tall, with truth values existing on a spectrum rather than as absolutes. Another approach suggests that context determines meaning. A pile in one situation might not be a pile in another, depending on what purpose the category serves and what alternatives are available for comparison. Still, others argue that the paradox reveals the limits of language rather than the limits of reality. Categories like heap and bold serve useful communicative functions, even if they can't withstand the pressure of logical extremes. The sorites paradox has practical implications for how we make decisions and navigate uncertainty. In many real-world situations, we must act on fuzzy categories and imprecise boundaries. The paradox reminds us to hold these categories lightly and remain aware of their limitations. In legal contexts, the paradox illuminates the challenges of writing laws and regulations. Legal language attempts to create precise boundaries for concepts that are naturally fuzzy. The results often seem arbitrary or create perverse incentives around the edges of legal categories. For example, laws that provide benefits to those below a certain income threshold create sharp discontinuities, where earning $1 additional can cost thousands in lost benefits. The sorites paradox helps explain why these cliff effects feel unfair. They impose sharp boundaries on what should be gradual transitions. In personal life, the paradox offers wisdom about accepting ambiguity and uncertainty. Many of the categories we use to understand ourselves and others, success, happiness, intelligence, attractiveness, are sorites concepts with no clear boundaries. Recognizing this can reduce anxiety about whether you're successful enough, happy enough, or good enough at various aspects of life. These categories are useful for general guidance, but become problematic when we demand precision from them. The paradox also suggests humility about knowledge and judgment. If basic concepts like heap resist precise definition, how much more complex are concepts like justice, freedom, or love? The sorites paradox reminds us that much of human understanding involves navigating uncertainty rather than achieving precision. In relationships, understanding the sorites nature of many emotional and social categories can improve communication and reduce conflict. Arguments about whether someone is being selfish, whether a comment was rude, or whether behavior crosses a line often stem from trying to impose sharp boundaries on concepts that are naturally fuzzy. The sorites paradox teaches us that wisdom often lies not in resolving these ambiguities, but in learning to work with them productively. Instead of demanding precision where none exists, we can focus on the practical purposes our categories serve and remain flexible about their boundaries. The paradox ultimately reveals something profound about the nature of human understanding. We navigate a complex world using imperfect tools, categories, and concepts that are useful despite their logical limitations. The miracle isn't that our language and reasoning are perfect. It's that they work as well as they do, despite their inherent fuzziness. Perhaps the sorites paradox's greatest lesson is that seeking absolute precision in an inherently fuzzy world is often counterproductive. Better to embrace the ambiguity, work with the uncertainty, and appreciate the practical wisdom that emerges from our imperfect but functional ways of understanding reality. The ship of Theseus. If you replaced every part of a ship over time, its planks, its sails, its masts, until none of the original parts remained. Would it still be the same ship? This question, known as the Ship of Theseus, has puzzled philosophers for over 2,000 years. It seems simple on the surface, but it opens a gateway into one of the most fundamental questions about reality itself. What makes something what it is? The paradox starts in ancient Athens, where the legendary ship that carried Theseus and the youth of Athens back from Crete was preserved as a monument. As the years passed, the wooden planks began to rot and decay. The Athenians replaced them one by one with new timber, maintaining the ship's structure and appearance. But this preservation raises a troubling question. If you replace enough parts, when does the ship stop being the original ship of Theseus? After replacing one plank, 10 planks, half the ship, all of it. The philosopher Plutarch made the puzzle even more complex. Imagine that someone collected all the old, discarded planks and used them to rebuild a ship using the original materials in their original configuration. Now, which ship is the real ship of Theseus? The one that has been continuously maintained with new parts, or the one reconstructed from the original materials? This paradox forces us to confront the nature of identity itself. What makes you you? What makes anything what it is? Is identity tied to physical substance, to continuity over time, to function and purpose, or to something else entirely? Consider your own body. The cells that make up your physical form are constantly dying and being replaced. Your skin cells completely regenerate every few weeks. Most of your body's cells are replaced within 7 years. By the Ship of Theseus logic, you're literally not the same person you were a decade ago. Yet you feel like the same continuous person. Why? The paradox reveals that our intuitive sense of identity doesn't align perfectly with physical reality. We feel like continuous beings, but we're actually more like rivers, constantly flowing and changing while maintaining a recognizable pattern. This has profound implications for how we think about personal identity and growth. If you're not literally the same person you were years ago, what connects your past and future selves? Is it memory? Consciousness? Some essential soul or spirit that transcends physical form? Different philosophical traditions offer different answers. Some argue that identity is tied to continuity of consciousness and memory. As long as you remember being your past self and experience yourself as a continuous being, you remain the same person despite physical changes. Others suggest that identity is more about pattern and information than about specific physical substrate. Just as a song remains the same song, whether played on a piano or a guitar, you remain you as long as the essential pattern of your thoughts, memories, and personality persists. Still others propose that identity is fundamentally relational, defined by your connections to other people, places, and experiences rather than by any intrinsic properties you possess. The Ship of Theseus paradox applies far beyond personal identity. Companies replace employees, buildings replace materials, cities replace structures, yet we consider them the same entities over time. What preserves their identity through change? Consider a business that started as a small bookstore, but has evolved into a global technology company, replacing its products, employees, mission, and even physical locations. At what point, if any, does it stop being the same company? Is Apple today the same company that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started in a garage? The paradox becomes even more relevant in our digital age. Your social media profile, your online accounts, your digital identity, are they the same as your physical self? If you could upload your consciousness to a computer, would that digital version be you or a copy of you? Advances in medical technology are making these questions practically urgent. If doctors can replace your heart, liver, kidneys, and other organs, you remain the same person. But what about brain transplants? If such procedures become possible, would you be the person with your original brain in a new body? Or would you be a new person with someone else's memories? The paradox also illuminates questions about aging and dementia. If someone's personality and memories change dramatically due to illness or injury, are they still the same person? Families wrestling with these situations often struggle with questions that the Ship of Theseus makes philosophically explicit. In relationships, the paradox offers insight into how we maintain connection despite constant change. The person you married years ago has literally different cells, different thoughts, different experiences than the person standing before you today. What makes them the same person you fell in love with? Perhaps the answer lies not in preserving some unchanging essence, but in embracing change as part of identity. The ship of Theseus paradox might be asking the wrong question. Instead of asking whether the ship remains the same, we might ask how it maintains continuity through change. This perspective suggests that identity is not about staying the same, but about changing in coherent ways. The ship remains the ship of Theseus, not because it's physically unchanged, but because its changes serve the purpose of preservation. The new planks honor the original by maintaining its function and meaning. Similarly, you remain you, not because you're physically or mentally unchanging, but because your changes follow patterns that maintain continuity with your past self. Personal growth doesn't threaten identity, it expresses it. The paradox also suggests that identity might be partially constructed through narrative and social recognition. The ship of Theseus is the ship of Theseus, partly because people continue to call it that and treat it as such. Identity exists not just in the object itself, but in the web of relationships and stories that surround it. This social dimension of identity explains why identity crises often accompany major life changes. When your roles, relationships, and circumstances change dramatically. The social support for your identity shifts, making you question who you really are. Understanding the ship of Theseus paradox can be liberating during periods of personal transformation. It reminds us that change doesn't destroy identity. It's how identity expresses itself over time. The fear that you're losing yourself during major life transitions might be based on a false understanding of what identity means. The paradox also offers wisdom about accepting the changes in others. When someone you care about seems to become a different person, the ship of Theseus reminds us that change is the natural state of all things. The question isn't whether they're still the same person, but how their changes connect to who they've always been. In the end, the ship of Theseus paradox doesn't have a single correct answer, because it reveals that identity itself is more complex and mysterious than our everyday language suggests. We are neither completely the same, nor completely different from our past selves. We are something more interesting, continuous beings capable of profound change. The paradox teaches us that the persistence of identity through change is one of the most remarkable features of existence. Whether we're talking about ships, people, or civilizations, the ability to maintain coherence while adapting to new circumstances is what allows life and meaning to flourish in a constantly changing world. Perhaps the deepest lesson of the ship of Theseus is that identity is not a thing, but a process, not a state, but a journey, not a destination, but a way of traveling. And in that traveling, we become most fully ourselves. Hilbert's Grand Hotel. Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, every single one occupied by a guest. A weary traveler arrives at the front desk, desperately needing a place to stay. The receptionist smiles warmly and says, "Of course we have space." This seems impossible. How can a completely full hotel accommodate another guest? Welcome to Hilbert's Grand Hotel, one of the most mind-bending thought experiments ever conceived. This paradox, created by mathematician David Hilbert, doesn't just challenge our understanding of space and accommodation, it revolutionizes how we think about infinity itself. Here's how the impossible becomes possible. The receptionist simply asks every current guest to move to the next room. The guest in room 1 moves to room 2, the guest in room 2 moves to room 3, and so on. This frees up room 1 for the new arrival. Even though the hotel was completely full, it makes space without displacing anyone. This seems to violate common sense. How can something that's full become fuller? How can you add to something infinite and still have infinity? But that's exactly the point. Infinity doesn't behave like finite numbers. It operates by its own strange and wonderful rules. But the Grand Hotel's impossibilities are just getting started. What happens when an infinitely large bus arrives, carrying an infinite number of new guests? Surely even an infinite hotel can't handle infinite new arrivals. Yet the clever receptionist has a solution. They ask each current guest to move to a room number that's double their current room number. The guest in room 1 moves to room 2, The guest in room 2 moves to room 4, the guest in room 3 moves to room 6, and so on. This leaves all the odd-numbered rooms empty, an infinite number of them, ready to accommodate the infinite bus passengers. The hotel somehow manages to fit infinity plus infinity, and still have room for more. This violates everything we understand about addition and space from our finite experience, but it reveals the peculiar mathematics of the infinite. The Grand Hotel paradox illustrates the difference between potential infinity and actual infinity. Potential infinity is the idea of a process that could continue forever, like counting numbers. You can always add one more, but you never reach a final, completed infinity. Actual infinity, represented by the Grand Hotel, is a completed infinite set. All the rooms exist simultaneously, all occupied by guests, yet still capable of accommodating more. This concept challenged mathematicians for centuries and remains difficult for the human mind to grasp. The paradox reveals counterintuitive properties of infinite sets. In finite collections, the part is always smaller than the whole. But with infinite sets, a part can be the same size as the whole. The set of even numbers is infinite, but so is the set of all numbers, even though even numbers are a subset of all numbers. This property allows the Grand Hotel to perform its magical accommodations. An infinite set of rooms can absorb any finite addition, or even certain types of infinite additions, without becoming larger because it was already infinitely large. The Grand Hotel also demonstrates different sizes of infinity, a concept that seems paradoxical. The mathematician Georg Cantor proved that some infinities are larger than others. The infinity of counting numbers is smaller than the infinity of real numbers, which includes all fractions and decimals. The hotel can handle countably infinite guests, those that can be put in correspondence with counting numbers. But it couldn't accommodate uncountably infinite guests, like all the real numbers between 0 and 1. This reveals that infinity itself has an infinite hierarchy of sizes. These mathematical insights have profound implications for our understanding of reality. In physics, questions about infinity arise in theories about the universe, black holes, and the nature of space and time. Is the universe infinite in size? Are there infinite parallel universes? Can physical quantities be infinitely large or infinitely small? The Grand Hotel paradox helps us think about these questions by training our intuition to work with infinite concepts. It shows us that our everyday understanding of size, space, and quantity breaks down when dealing with the infinite, requiring new ways of thinking. In computer science, the Grand Hotel illustrates principles of algorithmic thinking and resource management. Modern computing often deals with problems that seem to require infinite resources, processing infinite data streams, searching infinite solution spaces, handling infinite user requests. The hotel's creative solutions mirror the innovative approaches computer scientists use to handle these challenges. The paradox also connects to philosophical questions about the nature of existence and reality. If infinity can behave so counterintuitively in mathematics, what does this tell us about the limits of human understanding? Are there aspects of reality that simply cannot be grasped by minds evolved to deal with finite quantities? The Grand Hotel challenges our assumptions about scarcity and limitation. In the finite world, resources are limited and must be carefully allocated. But the hotel suggests the possibility of abundance without limit, spaces where traditional economic thinking breaks down. This has implications for how we think about digital resources and virtual spaces. Information can be copied infinitely without depleting the original. Digital spaces can accommodate unlimited users without becoming crowded in the traditional sense. The Grand Hotel provides a model for understanding these new forms of abundance. The paradox also illuminates the relationship between mathematics and intuition. The hotel's operations are mathematically rigorous and logically consistent, yet they feel impossible to our intuitive understanding. This tension reveals both the power and limitations of mathematical thinking. Our brains evolved to navigate a finite world with limited resources and countable quantities. The infinite world of the Grand Hotel requires abstract reasoning that goes beyond evolutionary intuition. This suggests that some truths about reality may only be accessible through mathematical rather than intuitive understanding. Yet the Grand Hotel also demonstrates the remarkable capacity of human imagination to extend beyond evolved limitations. Through thought experiments and mathematical reasoning, we can explore realms that have no counterpart in ordinary experience. The hotel's impossible architecture serves as a metaphor for the expanding boundaries of human knowledge. Just as the hotel can always accommodate more guests, human understanding can always accommodate new ideas and insights, even when they seem to contradict previous knowledge. The Grand Hotel paradox ultimately teaches us humility about the nature of reality and knowledge. It shows us that the universe operates by rules that often transcend human intuition and common sense. What seems impossible may simply be beyond our current understanding. This lesson extends beyond mathematics into all areas of knowledge. In science, art, philosophy, and daily life, the Grand Hotel reminds us to remain open to possibilities that challenge our assumptions about what's possible. The paradox also suggests that apparent contradictions and impossibilities might reveal deeper truths rather than fundamental errors. When reality seems to violate our expectations, the problem might not be with reality, but with the limitations of our expectations. In the end, the Grand Hotel stands as a monument to the power of human reasoning to transcend the boundaries of ordinary experience. It shows us that mathematics can open doors to rooms we never imagined, accommodate ideas that seem impossible, and always have space for one more insight into the infinite mystery of existence. The hotel never closes, never turns anyone away, and always has room for more. In a finite world of scarcity and limitation, it offers a glimpse of infinite possibility, infinite accommodation, and infinite wonder. And perhaps that's the most remarkable feature of all, that finite human minds can conceive of and explore the infinite, finding truth in paradox and possibility in impossibility. Schrödinger's cat. Picture a cat in a sealed box. This isn't just any cat, but a quantum cat existing in one of the strangest scenarios ever imagined. According to the laws of quantum mechanics, this cat is simultaneously alive and dead until someone opens the box to check. This is Schrödinger's cat, perhaps the most famous thought experiment in physics, and it reveals something deeply unsettling about the nature of reality itself. The experiment was conceived by Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger in 1935, not to explain quantum mechanics, but to criticize it. He found the implications of quantum theory so bizarre that he created this paradox to show how absurd they became when applied to everyday objects. Here's how the diabolical setup works. A cat is placed in a sealed steel box along with a Geiger counter, a radioactive atom, a hammer, and a flask of poison. If the radioactive atom decays, the Geiger counter detects it and triggers the hammer to break the flask, releasing the poison and killing the cat. If the atom doesn't decay, the cat lives. The quantum twist is that according to quantum mechanics, the radioactive atom exists in a state of superposition. It has both decayed and not decayed simultaneously until someone measures it. This means the cat's fate is tied to a quantum event, placing the cat itself in a state of superposition, both alive and dead at the same time. This seems impossible. How can something be both alive and dead? In our everyday experience, things exist in definite states. A light is either on or off. A door is either open or closed. A cat is either alive or dead. The idea of something existing in multiple contradictory states simultaneously violates our basic understanding of reality. But quantum mechanics insists that at the microscopic level, particles routinely exist in superposition. An electron can spin in multiple directions at once. A photon can travel through multiple paths simultaneously. These aren't abstract mathematical curiosities, but measurable phenomena that have been confirmed in countless experiments. The problem is scaling this quantum weirdness up to the everyday world. Schrödinger's cat sits at the boundary between the quantum and classical realms, forcing us to confront what happens when quantum rules apply to familiar objects. According to one interpretation of quantum mechanics, called the Copenhagen interpretation, the act of observation collapses the superposition. Before you open the box, the cat exists in both states. The moment you look inside, the superposition collapses, and the cat is found in one definite state, either alive or dead. This interpretation suggests that observation doesn't just reveal reality, it creates it. The universe exists in a fuzzy state of potential until conscious observers force it to choose specific outcomes. This idea is both fascinating and deeply troubling because it seems to give human consciousness a fundamental role in determining physical reality. But this raises even more questions. What counts as observation? Does it have to be a conscious human observer? Or would a video camera work? What about the Geiger counter inside the box? Isn't it already observing the radioactive atom? Different interpretations of quantum mechanics offer different answers to these questions. The many worlds interpretation suggests that the universe actually splits when quantum events occur. In one universe, the cat is alive. In another, it's dead. Both outcomes happen, but in separate realities that don't interact with each other. From this perspective, opening the box doesn't collapse a superposition, but reveals which universe you happen to be in. The cat was never in a state of being both alive and dead. It was alive in some universes and dead in others. Another interpretation, called quantum decoherence, suggests that superposition is disrupted by interaction with the environment. The cat isn't truly in superposition because it's constantly interacting with air molecules, electromagnetic radiation, and other environmental factors that force it into a definite state. These interactions happen so quickly and completely that superposition never has a chance to develop at the macroscopic level. From this view, Schrödinger's cat reveals not the strangeness of quantum mechanics, but the boundaries of where quantum effects can operate. Yet another approach questions whether consciousness plays any special role in quantum mechanics at all. Maybe observation is just a technical term for any physical interaction that provides information about a system, regardless of whether any conscious being is involved. These different interpretations reveal that Schrödinger's cat isn't just about physics, it's about the deepest questions of philosophy and existence. What is the relationship between mind and matter? Does reality exist independently of observation? How do we bridge the gap between scientific measurement and conscious experience? The paradox also highlights the challenge of understanding quantum mechanics through classical language and concepts. We're trying to describe a quantum reality using words and ideas evolved for a classical world. It's like trying to describe color to someone who has only experienced black and white. Modern quantum mechanics has moved far beyond Schrödinger's thought experiment, developing sophisticated mathematical frameworks that make precise predictions without requiring definitive answers to these philosophical questions. Quantum computers, quantum cryptography, and quantum sensors all work reliably without resolving the paradox of the cat. But the cat still haunts us because it forces us to confront the limits of human understanding. Even our most successful scientific theories describe a reality that seems fundamentally alien to ordinary experience. The quantum world operates by rules that contradict common sense. Particles can be in multiple places at once, can influence each other instantaneously across vast distances, and can exist in states that have no classical analog. Schrödinger's cat brings these strange quantum properties into focus by applying them to something familiar and concrete. This tension between the quantum and classical worlds reflects a deeper tension in human knowledge. We live in a classical world, but are made of quantum particles. Our brains, which create our sense of reality, are themselves quantum systems operating according to quantum laws. Some philosophers and scientists have speculated that consciousness itself might be a quantum phenomenon, that the strange properties of quantum mechanics might explain the mystery of subjective experience. But these ideas remain highly controversial and far from proven. What's certain is that Schrödinger's cat has become more than a thought experiment. It's a cultural icon representing the mysteries and paradoxes of modern science. It reminds us that reality is far stranger than it appears, and that our everyday experience provides only a limited window into the true nature of existence. The cat in the box serves as a constant reminder that the universe doesn't owe us intuitive explanations. Some truths about reality may only be accessible through abstract mathematics and experimental measurement, forever beyond the reach of common sense. Yet there's something profoundly hopeful about Schrödinger's cat as well. It shows that human beings can conceive of and investigate realities far beyond their immediate experience. We can use thought experiments to explore the implications of scientific theories and push the boundaries of understanding. The cat may be simultaneously alive and dead in its quantum box, but it's very much alive in the world of ideas, continuing to provoke new questions and insights about the nature of reality. And perhaps that's the most fitting fate for a paradox born from the marriage of imagination and rigorous scientific thinking. In the end, Schrödinger's cat doesn't provide easy answers about quantum mechanics or reality. Instead, it provides something more valuable: a window into the profound mysteries that lie beneath the surface of existence, reminding us that the universe is far more strange and wonderful than we ever dared imagine. Olbers's paradox. Look up at the night sky on a clear evening. You'll see thousands of stars scattered across the darkness, but mostly you'll see empty black space stretching between them. This darkness seems natural, even inevitable. After all, stars are far apart and space is vast. But here's a question that has puzzled astronomers for centuries. If the universe is infinite and filled with stars, why is the night sky dark at all? This is Olbers's paradox, named after the German astronomer Heinrich Olbers, who popularized it in the 19th century. The paradox reveals a fundamental contradiction between our expectations about an infinite universe and the reality we observe every night. Think about it logically. If the universe is infinite in size and age, and if it contains an infinite number of stars distributed throughout space, then every line of sight from Earth should eventually intersect with the surface of a star. No matter which direction you look, your view should end at a star, just like how every line of sight in a dense forest eventually hits a tree trunk. If this were true, the entire night sky should blaze with the light of countless stars, appearing as bright as the surface of the sun. There should be no darkness, no black space between stars, just an endless sea of stellar light. The night sky should be blindingly bright. Obviously, this isn't what we observe. The night sky is mostly dark, punctuated by the light of individual stars and planets. This darkness contradicts our expectations about an infinite universe filled with infinite stars. For centuries, astronomers proposed various solutions to this paradox. Some suggested that dust and gas between stars absorbed starlight, preventing distant stars from being visible. But this explanation doesn't work, because over infinite time, the dust would heat up from absorbing starlight and begin glowing itself, contributing to the brightness rather than reducing it. Others proposed that stars might be clustered together, leaving vast empty regions of space. But in a truly infinite universe, even with clustering, there should still be enough stars to light up the sky completely. The resolution to Olbers's paradox came with modern cosmology, and our understanding that the universe is neither infinite in age nor static in size. These discoveries revolutionized our understanding of cosmic darkness and revealed profound truths about the nature of space and time. First, the universe has a finite age. Current evidence suggests it's approximately 13.8 billion years old, born in the Big Bang. This means that light from stars more than 13.8 billion light-years away hasn't had enough time to reach us yet. We can only see stars within our cosmic light horizon, a sphere centered on Earth with a radius of about 13.8 billion light-years. This finite age creates gaps in our view of the universe. Beyond the cosmic light horizon lies the observable universe's edge, not because space ends there, but because light from more distant regions hasn't had time to reach us. The darkness between stars partly reflects these unreachable regions. Second, the universe is expanding. This expansion stretches the light from distant stars and galaxies, shifting it toward longer wavelengths in a phenomenon called redshift. Light that started as visible radiation from distant stars can be stretched so much that it becomes infrared, or radio waves, invisible to our eyes. This cosmic expansion means that the most distant observable objects appear redder and dimmer than they would in a static universe. Some of the darkness in the night sky comes from light that has been redshifted beyond our ability to see it. Third, stars have not been shining forever. The first stars formed several 100 million years after the Big Bang, and star formation rates have varied throughout cosmic history. The universe hasn't had infinite time to fill with starlight, and the distribution of stars in space and time is not uniform. These factors combine to resolve Olbers's paradox. The night sky is dark because we live in a young, expanding universe where starlight has had only a finite time to reach us and has been stretched by cosmic expansion during its journey. But the paradox teaches us something deeper than just the solution to an astronomical puzzle. It illustrates how our intuitions about infinity and space can lead us astray. The seemingly simple question about sky darkness opens windows into the most fundamental properties of the universe. The darkness between stars isn't empty space. It's filled with information about cosmic history. The cosmic microwave background radiation, a faint glow left over from the Big Bang, fills the entire sky at wavelengths our eyes can't detect. This radiation tells us about the universe when it was only 380,000 years old, long before the first stars formed. The paradox also reveals how scientific understanding develops through apparent contradictions. When observations don't match theoretical expectations, the mismatch often points toward new discoveries. Olbers's paradox helped astronomers realize that their assumptions about the universe were incorrect. This pattern repeats throughout scientific history. Apparent contradictions and paradoxes often signal that our current understanding is incomplete or incorrect. They serve as guideposts pointing toward new insights and discoveries. Olber's paradox also demonstrates the interconnectedness of different areas of physics and astronomy. Understanding why the night sky is dark requires knowledge of cosmic expansion, stellar evolution, the age of the universe, and the properties of light and radiation. No single piece of information could resolve the paradox alone. The darkness we see when we look up at night connects us to the deepest questions about existence itself. Every patch of dark sky reminds us that we live in a universe with a beginning, a history, and an ongoing evolution. The darkness is not absence, but presence. The presence of cosmic time and space stretched beyond our direct perception. This perspective transforms how we might think about darkness in general. Rather than seeing darkness as the absence of light, we can understand it as information about distance, time, and the limits of observation. The spaces between stars carry messages about the fundamental structure of reality. Olbers's paradox reminds us that even the most basic observations about our world can harbor profound mysteries. The darkness that seems so ordinary and inevitable actually encodes deep truths about cosmic history, the nature of space and time, and the evolution of the universe. When you look up at the night sky, you're not just seeing stars scattered through empty space. You're seeing a carefully structured arrangement of light and darkness that tells the story of cosmic evolution. The darkness is as meaningful as the light, perhaps more so, because it reveals the limits and history of what we can observe. The paradox also teaches us humility about our place in the cosmos. The darkness reminds us that our view of the universe is necessarily limited by our position in space and time. We see only a tiny fraction of what exists, bounded by the speed of light and the age of the universe. Yet this limitation also makes our existence precious and unique. The darkness that surrounds us creates the very conditions that make life possible. If the night sky were blazing with infinite starlight, Earth would be too hot for life to emerge. The cosmic darkness that puzzled Olbers is actually essential for our existence. In the end, Olbers's paradox transforms a simple question about darkness into a profound meditation on cosmic history, the nature of observation, and our place in an evolving universe. The next time you look up at the dark night sky, remember that you're seeing not emptiness, but information, not absence, but presence, not the lack of stars, but the signature of cosmic time itself. The friendship paradox. Scroll through your social media feed. Look at the endless stream of parties you weren't invited to, adventures you didn't take, celebrations where you're conspicuously absent. Everyone else seems to have more friends, more fun, more life than you do. But here's the twist that will change how you see social connection forever. This feeling isn't just in your head, and it's not a reflection of your social worth. You're experiencing one of the most fascinating paradoxes of human network behavior, the friendship paradox. This paradox reveals a mathematical truth so counterintuitive, it feels like magic. On average, your friends really do have more friends than you do. And this isn't because you're antisocial or unpopular. It's because of how networks work at the most fundamental level. Imagine social connections as a vast web stretching across humanity. Some people sit at the center of this web, connected to dozens or even hundreds of others. These social butterflies, let's call them hubs, touch many lives. Others exist more quietly on the periphery, maintaining smaller circles of close relationships. Here's where the mathematics becomes magical. If someone has 100 friends, they have 100 chances to be your friend. Someone with only 2 friends has just 2 chances. This means you're statistically more likely to be connected to people who have lots of connections. It's like being more likely to meet people at Grand Central Station than in a small town diner. The hubs of human connection naturally draw more people into their orbit, which skews your personal sample of humanity toward the more connected. Social media transforms this mathematical reality into an emotional amplifier. When you scroll through Instagram or Facebook, you're not seeing a random sample of human experience. You're seeing the curated highlights of the most connected people in your network. Think about it. That friend who posts constantly about their social life? They're probably one of your more connected friends. The quiet introvert who has deep, meaningful relationships with 3 people? Their life doesn't generate the same digital footprint, so their reality becomes invisible in your feed. This creates a double distortion. Not only are you more likely to be friends with social butterflies, the mathematical reality, but their highly social lives are also more visible to you, the technological amplification. No wonder everyone else seems to be having more fun. The friendship paradox doesn't just affect your friend count. It shapes your entire emotional relationship with connection and belonging. When your brain compares your social life to your friends' social lives, it's making a comparison based on fundamentally skewed data. You experience your own social life from the inside. All the quiet moments, the times you stay home, the social anxiety, the perfectly content evenings spent alone. But you experience others' social lives from the outside, through their posts, their stories, their highlights. This asymmetry creates what psychologists call compare and despair. You're comparing your behind-the-scenes reality to everyone else's highlight reel, but the friendship paradox means that highlight reel is coming from the most socially active people in your network. The friendship paradox extends far beyond social media into every aspect of how we perceive normalcy and success. Your professional network is likely skewed toward people who are more connected in their industries, making their career achievements seem more common than they actually are. People with more disposable income often have larger social networks, making expensive lifestyles appear more normal within your social circle. Those who are more social are more likely to share news about relationships, marriages, births, and achievements, creating the illusion that everyone is hitting life milestones faster than you are. Remarkably, epidemiologists have turned the friendship paradox into a powerful tool for tracking and preventing disease outbreaks. Because highly connected people are more likely to be in your network, they're also more likely to encounter new diseases early. By monitoring the health of people's friends rather than random individuals, health officials can detect epidemics up to 2 weeks earlier than traditional surveillance methods. The same mathematical quirk that makes you feel socially inadequate becomes an early warning system for protecting public health. This application reveals the paradox's deeper wisdom. The distortions in our networks aren't bugs. They're features that can provide valuable information about the world around us. The friendship paradox also illuminates how social inequality perpetuates itself. In any network, a small number of highly connected individuals have disproportionate influence over everyone else's perception of normal. These social hubs don't just have more friends. They have more opportunities, more access to information, more ability to shape trends and opinions. Their outsized visibility means their lifestyle, values, and experiences become the template for what success looks like. This creates a feedback loop. The most connected people appear most successful, which makes others want to emulate them, which further increases the connected people's influence and apparent success. Understanding the friendship paradox is profoundly liberating. It means that feeling less popular than your friends isn't a personal failing. It's a mathematical inevitability for most people. The comparison that makes you feel inadequate is based on fundamentally flawed data. This doesn't mean your feelings of social isolation aren't real or don't matter. Loneliness is a genuine human experience that deserves attention and care. But it does mean that the evidence you're using to judge your social worth, the apparent popularity of everyone around you, is systematically biased. The friendship paradox points toward a radical reframing of what social success means. Instead of asking, how many friends do I have compared to my friends, ask how meaningful are my connections. Quality relationships don't show up in the paradox's mathematics. The friend who calls you when you're struggling, who remembers your birthday without Facebook reminding them, who laughs at your terrible jokes. These connections can't be measured by network size or social media presence. The paradox reveals that we've been using the wrong metrics for social success. Connection isn't about quantity, it's about the depth of mutual understanding, support, and genuine care. There's profound wisdom in occupying the periphery of social networks rather than the center. While hubs get more attention, people on the edges often develop richer, more authentic relationships. They have the luxury of choosing their connections carefully, rather than managing hundreds of superficial relationships. The introvert with 3 close friends may experience more genuine intimacy than the social butterfly with 300 Facebook friends. The paradox helps us see that being less connected isn't a social failure. It's often a conscious choice that leads to deeper, more meaningful relationships. How do you escape the emotional trap of the friendship paradox? Start by recognizing it when it happens. When you feel like everyone else has a more active social life, remind yourself that you're seeing a mathematically skewed sample. Focus on cultivating relationships that matter to you, rather than relationships that look impressive to others. Seek out people who share your values and interests, rather than people who will increase your social status. Most importantly, remember that the goal of human connection isn't to accumulate friends like trophies. It's to find people who see you, understand you, and choose to share their lives with you. Those relationships, however few they may be, are worth more than all the hollow popularity in the world. The friendship paradox is ultimately a teacher disguised as a mathematical curiosity. It teaches us about the distortions in our perception, the biases in our comparisons, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. It reminds us that our individual experience of reality is always partial, always skewed by the particular slice of the world we happen to see. The wisdom lies not in trying to eliminate these distortions. That's impossible. But in understanding them well enough to see beyond them. In a world that constantly bombards us with other people's highlight reels, the friendship paradox offers a different kind of vision. It helps us see that the grass isn't actually greener on the other side. We're just standing in a position where the other side's grass is more visible. The true revolution comes when you stop trying to be the most connected person in your network and start trying to be the most genuine. Because while the friendship paradox guarantees that most people will feel less popular than their friends, it can't touch the quality of the connections you choose to nurture. And in the end, one real friend who truly knows you is worth more than 1,000 followers who only know your image. The tolerance paradox. Imagine you've built the perfect society, a place where every voice is heard, every belief is respected, and every person is free to live according to their own values. It's a utopia of tolerance, where difference is celebrated and diversity is the highest virtue. But then something dark appears on the horizon. An ideology that rejects tolerance itself, that seeks to silence other voices and impose its own narrow vision on everyone else. What do you do? If you suppress this intolerant ideology, haven't you just become intolerant yourself? But if you allow it to flourish, won't it eventually destroy the very tolerance that gave it space to grow? Welcome to the tolerance paradox, one of the most urgent and troubling dilemmas facing every free society. This paradox exposes a fundamental flaw in the logic of unlimited tolerance. Tolerance, when taken to its absolute limit, becomes self-destructive. The philosopher Karl Popper first articulated this paradox in 1945, in the shadow of World War II. He had witnessed how democratic societies, in their commitment to freedom and tolerance, had allowed intolerant ideologies to gain power, and then used that power to destroy democracy itself. The paradox works like this. If a society is infinitely tolerant, it must tolerate intolerance. But intolerance, by definition, seeks to eliminate tolerance. Therefore, unlimited tolerance leads to the elimination of tolerance, a logical contradiction that eats away at the foundation of free society. This isn't just abstract philosophy. History provides chilling examples of this paradox in action. The Weimar Republic in Germany was remarkably tolerant and democratic, allowing all political parties, including the Nazis, to participate in the political process. The Nazis used this democratic tolerance to gain power, then immediately began dismantling the very democratic institutions that had allowed their rise. Today, the tolerance paradox plays out across every domain of public life, from social media platforms to university campuses, from workplace policies to national politics. Should social media platforms allow hate speech in the name of free expression? If they don't, are they violating the principle of open dialogue? If they do, are they providing a platform for voices that seek to silence others? Should universities provide platforms for speakers whose ideas many find offensive or harmful? The principle of academic freedom suggests yes, but what about speakers whose ideas could contribute to an environment where certain students feel unsafe or unwelcome? Should societies tolerate religious practices that themselves reject tolerance? What about religious groups that seek to impose their beliefs on others, or that discriminate against women, LGBT individuals, or other faiths? Each of these situations presents the same underlying dilemma. Tolerating intolerance may enable its spread, but suppressing it violates the very principle of tolerance we're trying to protect. One of the most dangerous aspects of the tolerance paradox is how it can be weaponized. Those in power can use the rhetoric of fighting intolerance to justify suppressing any opposition or dissent. Every authoritarian regime in history has claimed to be protecting society from dangerous ideas. This creates a chilling effect on legitimate debate and discussion. If we label opposing viewpoints as intolerant, we can justify silencing them without engaging with their actual merits. The paradox becomes a tool for shutting down dialogue rather than protecting it. The challenge is distinguishing between genuine threats to tolerant society and mere disagreement. Not every controversial opinion is intolerant. Not every uncomfortable idea threatens the fabric of democracy. The line between protecting tolerance and becoming intolerant ourselves is razor thin and constantly shifting. Popper's own solution to the paradox was both elegant and controversial. He argued that a tolerant society should indeed be intolerant, but only toward intolerance itself. This seems circular, but Popper refined the idea. Tolerance should extend to all ideas and beliefs, except those that explicitly reject the possibility of rational debate and seek to answer arguments with violence or suppression. In other words, you can believe whatever you want, express whatever you want, and advocate for whatever social arrangements you prefer, as long as you're willing to engage in rational discussion and accept that others have the same rights. This solution preserves the core of tolerance while protecting it from those who would abuse it. But implementing it requires constant vigilance and careful judgment about when ideas cross the line from disagreeable to genuinely dangerous. The tolerance paradox reveals deep truths about human psychology and group dynamics. Tolerance isn't natural. It's learned behavior that goes against some of our deepest evolutionary instincts. Humans evolved in small groups where conformity and shared beliefs were essential for survival. Difference was often dangerous. Our brains are wired to be suspicious of outgroups and to prefer the familiar and similar. Tolerance requires us to override these instincts, to consciously choose acceptance over suspicion, curiosity over conformity. This takes psychological energy and emotional maturity. When people feel threatened or uncertain, they often retreat to intolerant positions as a form of psychological safety. This means that tolerance is always fragile. It requires not just laws and institutions, but a culture that actively cultivates empathy, curiosity, and the ability to live with uncertainty and ambiguity. How do we apply the wisdom of the tolerance paradox in our daily lives? Before labeling someone or some idea as intolerant, try to understand their perspective. Are they expressing disagreement, or are they actually trying to silence opposition? Tolerance should protect people's right to believe and express their ideas, but it doesn't require tolerating harmful actions. You can oppose discrimination while still allowing people to hold and express discriminatory beliefs. The most important thing to protect isn't any particular set of ideas, but the process by which ideas compete in the marketplace of thought. Guard the institutions and norms that allow for open debate. Physical safety and the right to participate in society are non-negotiable. Emotional comfort and the absence of disagreement are not. A tolerant society must sometimes accept that people will hear ideas they find offensive. The internet has transformed the tolerance paradox in unprecedented ways. Digital platforms can amplify intolerant voices far beyond their actual support in society. Algorithms designed to maximize engagement often promote controversial and divisive content because it generates strong reactions. This creates a new version of the paradox. Should platform companies use their private power to moderate content in ways that governments cannot? If they don't, intolerant voices may dominate digital discourse. If they do, they become private arbiters of acceptable speech with unprecedented power over public conversation. The global nature of digital platforms adds another layer of complexity. Whose standards of tolerance should apply? American free speech norms? European hate speech laws? The cultural values of the most restrictive countries where platforms operate? Perhaps the deepest solution to the tolerance paradox lies in education. Not just formal schooling, but the ongoing cultural work of helping people develop the skills and mindset necessary for tolerance. This includes the ability to distinguish between evidence-based arguments and manipulation, between good faith disagreement and bad faith attempts to silence opposition. The capacity to encounter ideas that challenge or upset you without immediately seeking to silence them. Understanding how tolerance and intolerance have played out in different societies and times, providing context for contemporary debates. The ability to understand why people might hold different beliefs without necessarily agreeing with them. The tolerance paradox ultimately teaches us that even our highest virtues have limits. Tolerance is crucial for human flourishing, but unlimited tolerance becomes its own form of destruction. This doesn't make tolerance hypocritical or worthless. It makes it human. Like all human institutions, tolerance must be balanced with other values. Safety, dignity, the possibility of rational discourse, the protection of democratic processes. The paradox reminds us that living in a free society requires more than just good intentions. It requires wisdom, judgment, and the difficult work of distinguishing between the tolerance that builds community and the tolerance that enables destruction. You don't solve the tolerance paradox. You live with it. Every generation must navigate it anew, finding the balance between openness and protection that fits their unique circumstances and challenges. This navigation requires both principles and pragmatism, both idealism and realism. It requires the humility to admit that reasonable people can disagree about where to draw the lines and the courage to draw them anyway. The paradox teaches us that tolerance isn't passive acceptance of everything. It's the active work of creating space for human dignity and diversity while protecting the conditions that make such space possible. In the end, a truly tolerant society isn't one that accepts everything, but one that has the wisdom to know what it cannot accept without losing its soul. That wisdom isn't written in any law or constitution. It lives in the daily choices of citizens who understand that freedom requires not just rights, but responsibilities, not just openness, but discernment. The tolerance paradox reminds us that democracy and freedom are not natural states, but human achievements that require constant tending. They are gardens that must be cultivated, weeded, and protected, not wild spaces where anything can grow unchecked. And perhaps that's the paradox's greatest lesson. That true tolerance is not the absence of boundaries, but the wisdom to draw them in the right places, for the right reasons, in service of the highest human aspirations. The paradox of choice. Walk into any modern supermarket, and you'll encounter a uniquely contemporary form of torture. The cereal aisle. Hundreds of options stretch before you. Whole grain, low fat, high fiber, organic, gluten-free, protein-enriched, artificially flavored, naturally sweetened. What should be a simple purchase becomes an existential crisis. You stand there, paralyzed by possibility, wondering if you're making the right choice, knowing that whatever you choose, you'll probably regret not choosing something else. This is your first encounter with the paradox of choice, and it's about to reveal something disturbing about modern life. The very freedom we fought so hard to achieve might be making us miserable. For centuries, human beings fought for choice. We battled kings who told us what to believe, governments that told us where to live, societies that told us whom to marry. Choice represented liberation, self-determination, the fundamental human right to shape our own destiny. But something strange happened on the way to freedom. As our choices multiplied exponentially, our satisfaction began to decline. The promise of choice was that it would make us happier. Instead, it often makes us anxious, overwhelmed, and perpetually dissatisfied. Psychologist Barry Schwartz identified this paradox in his groundbreaking research. He discovered that while some choice is essential for well-being, too much choice can be psychologically devastating. The liberation we sought has become a new form of bondage. To understand why choice can become torturous, we need to understand the mathematics of decision-making. Every choice involves opportunity cost, the value of what you give up when you choose one option over another. When you had 3 breakfast cereals to choose from, the opportunity cost was low. If you chose cornflakes over Rice Krispies, you might wonder briefly about what you missed, but you'd move on quickly. But when you have 300 cereals to choose from, the opportunity cost becomes overwhelming. For every box you put in your cart, you're saying no to 299 others. Your brain becomes hyper-aware of all the possibilities you're missing, making it almost impossible to feel satisfied with any choice. This mathematical reality creates what psychologists call decision fatigue, the deteriorating quality of decisions made after a long session of decision-making. Your brain, overwhelmed by options, starts making worse choices or avoiding choices altogether. The paradox of choice affects different people differently, depending on their decision-making style. Schwartz identified 2 types of choosers: maximizers and satisficers. Maximizers feel compelled to find the absolute best option. They research obsessively, compare endlessly, and agonize over every decision. In a world of limited choices, this thoroughness might pay off. But in a world of infinite options, maximizers become trapped in endless cycles of comparison and regret. Satisficers, on the other hand, set criteria for good enough and choose the first option that meets those criteria. They're willing to accept that there might be better options out there, but they value peace of mind over perfect optimization. Research consistently shows that satisficers are happier than maximizers, even when maximizers make objectively better choices. The maximizer gets the best apartment, the best job, the best investment, and feels worse about all of them because they're constantly wondering if they could have done better. Digital technology has transformed the paradox of choice from a minor inconvenience into a dominant feature of modern life. Every choice now comes with the ability to instantly research alternatives, read reviews, compare prices, and second-guess decisions. Dating apps present you with thousands of potential partners. Streaming services offer millions of movies and shows. Online retailers stock every imaginable product. The infinite scroll has become the perfect metaphor for modern choice. There's always more to see, always another option just one swipe away. This technological amplification creates new psychological problems. Fear of missing out. The constant awareness that better options might exist makes it difficult to commit to any choice. When faced with too many options, people often choose nothing at all, abandoning shopping carts, delaying decisions, or sticking with defaults. The ability to instantly compare options can trap people in endless research cycles, spending more time choosing than enjoying their choices. One of the cruelest aspects of the paradox of choice is how it escalates our expectations. When you have only a few options, you expect to find something acceptable. When you have thousands of options, you expect to find something perfect. But perfection is a moving target in a world of infinite choice. No matter what you choose, you know there are other options you haven't explored. This creates a persistent sense of dissatisfaction, even when your choice is objectively excellent. The restaurant you chose is good, but was there a better one 3 blocks away? The career path you picked is fulfilling, but would the alternative have been more rewarding? The person you married is wonderful, but what about all the people you never met? This escalation of expectations creates what researchers call the hedonic treadmill. You need ever better outcomes just to maintain the same level of satisfaction. Nowhere is the paradox of choice more poignant than in romantic relationships. Previous generations often married people from their immediate community, perhaps choosing from dozens of potential partners. Today's generation can potentially connect with millions of people through dating apps and social media. This expansion of choice has created new anxieties and behaviors. The belief that there's always someone better out there leads to endless dating without commitment. People apply consumer logic to relationships, constantly evaluating partners against alternatives instead of focusing on building deep connections. The abundance of choice creates what some researchers call choice overload syndrome. People become so focused on keeping their options open that they never fully commit to any relationship. They're always wondering if they've settled, always keeping one eye on the door. This doesn't mean that having options in love is bad. Choice allows people to find more compatible partners and escape unhappy relationships, but it also creates new forms of relationship anxiety that previous generations didn't face. The corporate world has weaponized the paradox of choice to increase profits and reduce customer satisfaction simultaneously. Companies offer hundreds of product variants not to serve customers better, but to create the illusion of meaningful choice while making decision-making more difficult. Consider phone plans, insurance policies, or investment options. Companies deliberately make these choices complex and confusing, knowing that overwhelmed customers will either stick with default options that favor the company or make impulsive decisions they'll later regret. The paradox has become a tool of control disguised as freedom. By overwhelming people with choices, companies can manipulate behavior while claiming to offer ultimate freedom and customization. Even worse, many of these choices are largely illusory. Dozens of breakfast cereals might be made by the same 3 companies with virtually identical nutritional profiles. The appearance of choice masks the reality of limited, meaningful differences. So how do we escape the tyranny of choice? The answer isn't to eliminate all options, but to develop strategies for managing them wisely. Set criteria for good enough before you start choosing. Decide what really matters to you, and stop searching once you find something that meets those criteria. Recognize that the perfect choice often doesn't exist, and the time spent searching for it could be better used, enjoying your decent choice. Limit your options artificially. Instead of researching every possible restaurant in your city, pick 3 and choose among them. Use curated lists, trusted recommendations, or random selection to reduce your choice set to a manageable size. Focus on reversible decisions differently than irreversible ones. If you can easily change your mind later, don't agonize over the choice. Save your decision-making energy for choices that truly matter and are difficult to undo. Most importantly, practice gratitude for the choices you make. Instead of focusing on what you might have missed, appreciate what you gained. The paradox of choice preys on regret and second-guessing. Gratitude is its antidote. The paradox of choice reveals a profound truth about human psychology. We think we want infinite options, but what we really want is confidence in our decisions. We think more choice means more freedom, but often it means more anxiety. The ancient Greeks knew something we've forgotten. The good life isn't about having every possible option. It's about knowing what you value and making choices that align with those values. It's about accepting that every choice involves trade-offs and finding peace with the trade-offs you make. In a world of infinite choices, the ultimate freedom might be the wisdom to limit your options, to choose mindfully rather than obsessively, to satisfy rather than maximize, to embrace the good enough rather than chase the perfect. Because in the end, the choice that makes you happy isn't necessarily the best choice available. It's the choice you can live with, appreciate, and stop second-guessing. And that kind of choice is available to everyone, regardless of how many options line the shelves. The diamond water paradox. Consider the most essential substance on Earth, water. Without it, every form of life as we know it would cease to exist. Every cell in your body depends on it. Every crop that feeds you requires it. Every process that sustains civilization relies on it. Yet in most places, water is virtually free, sometimes costing less than a penny per gallon. Now consider diamonds. Chemically, they're just carbon arranged in a particular crystal structure. You could live your entire life without ever needing one. They serve no vital biological function, yet a single small diamond can cost thousands of dollars, more than most people spend on water in a lifetime. This is the diamond-water paradox, and it reveals something profound about how we value things in life. It forces us to confront a fundamental question. What determines the worth of something? Is it how essential it is for survival? How rare it is? How much we desire it? Or something else entirely? This paradox was first recognized by Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, and it has puzzled thinkers for centuries. At its core, it exposes the difference between two types of value that we often confuse: use value and exchange value. Use value refers to how useful something is for satisfying human needs and wants. Water has enormous use value because it's literally essential for life. Exchange value, on the other hand, refers to what something can be traded for in the marketplace. Diamonds have high exchange value, despite having relatively low use value for most people. The paradox emerges because we intuitively expect these two types of value to align. Surely the most useful things should also be the most expensive. But reality stubbornly refuses to cooperate with our intuitions. The resolution to this ancient puzzle lies in understanding marginal utility, a concept that revolutionized economics in the late 19th century. Marginal utility is the additional satisfaction you get from consuming one more unit of something. Think about it this way. If you're dying of thirst in a desert, a glass of water is priceless. It could literally save your life. But if you're at home with unlimited access to clean water, an additional glass has very little value because your basic needs are already met. Diamonds work in reverse. Because they're rare, each additional diamond you encounter has high marginal utility for those who value them. Their scarcity means that every diamond feels special and valuable. This principle of marginal utility explains many apparent contradictions in how we value things. Air is even more essential than water. You can only survive minutes without it, yet it's completely free in most circumstances because it's so abundant that the marginal utility of additional air is zero. The diamond-water paradox reveals how our economic systems often fail to reflect our deepest values. The things that matter most for human flourishing, water, air, basic food, companionship, aren't necessarily the things that command the highest prices. This creates profound implications for how we organize society. If markets naturally undervalue the most essential resources, what does that mean for ensuring everyone has access to what they need for a decent life? The paradox also exposes how scarcity and abundance shape our perceptions of value. We tend to take abundant resources for granted while obsessing over rare ones. This psychological quirk made sense in our evolutionary past when scarcity was the norm. But it can lead us astray in a world where artificial scarcity is often created for profit. Consider how this plays out in your personal life. You probably spend more mental energy choosing between dozens of streaming services than appreciating the miracle of clean water flowing from your tap. You might stress over which luxury purchase to make while barely noticing the free sunset outside your window. The diamond-water paradox extends beyond economics into philosophy and psychology. It forces us to confront the difference between what we need and what we want, between what sustains us and what status symbols we display. In many ways, modern consumer culture amplifies the paradox. Marketing constantly tries to convince us that luxury goods are essential while taking truly essential resources for granted. We're encouraged to identify with brands of diamonds and handbags while remaining unconscious of where our water comes from. The paradox also highlights the role of social context in determining value. Diamonds are expensive partly because society has agreed they symbolize love and commitment. This social meaning creates real economic value, even though it's based on collective belief rather than inherent properties of the stone. This reveals something profound about human nature. We're social creatures who create meaning and value through shared understanding. The price of diamonds reflects not just their physical scarcity, but our collective decision to imbue them with symbolic significance. But the diamond-water paradox also warns us about the fragility of our current value systems. In regions experiencing drought or water crisis, the relative values of water and diamonds shift dramatically. Water becomes precious while diamonds become irrelevant luxuries. Climate change and environmental degradation are forcing us to reckon with the paradox on a global scale. As water becomes scarcer in many regions, its exchange value is rising to match its use value. We're discovering that markets can be remarkably slow to price in environmental realities. The paradox teaches us to think critically about the prices we see around us. High prices don't necessarily indicate high value for human welfare, and low prices don't necessarily indicate low importance for human flourishing. This has practical implications for personal decision-making. Instead of using price as a guide to importance, we might ask different questions. What actually makes my life better? What do I truly need versus what do I think I want? How has marketing shaped my perception of value? The diamond water paradox also reveals the importance of gratitude and perspective. When we understand how marginal utility works, we can better appreciate the abundant resources in our lives that we might otherwise take for granted. Every time you turn on a tap and water flows out, you're experiencing something that would be miraculous to most humans throughout history. Every breath of clean air is a gift that money literally cannot buy in many parts of the world. The paradox reminds us to value what truly sustains us, rather than what simply appears expensive. In our personal relationships, the diamond water paradox offers profound wisdom. The people who are always there for us, like water, might not always get the attention and appreciation they deserve. Meanwhile, we might chase relationships that are rare or difficult to obtain, like diamonds, without considering whether they actually add value to our lives. The paradox suggests a different approach to living. Instead of always pursuing what's scarce and expensive, we might cultivate deeper appreciation for what's abundant and essential. Instead of measuring worth by price, we might measure it by contribution to genuine well-being. This doesn't mean luxury and beauty have no place in life. Diamonds can be genuinely beautiful, and there's nothing wrong with appreciating beautiful things. But the paradox warns us against confusing price with worth, scarcity with value, and luxury with necessity. The diamond water paradox ultimately teaches us that value is complex, contextual, and often counterintuitive. It challenges us to think more deeply about what we truly value and why. It reminds us that the market's valuation of things isn't always aligned with their importance for human flourishing. As you move through your day, notice the water you drink, the air you breathe, the relationships that sustain you. These might not command high prices in the marketplace, but they're the true diamonds of human existence. And perhaps that's the paradox's greatest lesson, that the most valuable things in life often appear ordinary until we learn to see them clearly. The paradox of thrift. Now imagine a simple economic principle that everyone believes to be true. Saving money is good. When individuals save more, they become more financially secure. When families save more, they build wealth and stability. It seems obvious that if saving is good for individuals, it must be good for society as a whole. But what if this common sense wisdom is wrong? What if everyone saving at the same time could actually destroy the economy and make everyone poorer? This is the paradox of thrift, and it reveals a disturbing truth about economics. What's rational for an individual can be disastrous when everyone does it simultaneously. This paradox strikes at the heart of how we think about personal responsibility, economic policy, and the relationship between individual and collective well-being. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Sometimes being personally virtuous can contribute to collective catastrophe. The paradox of thrift was popularized by economist John Maynard Keynes during the Great Depression, though the basic idea had been recognized by earlier thinkers. The logic is deceptively simple, yet its implications are profound. When you save money, you're not spending it. Your saving becomes someone else's lost income. The restaurant doesn't get your dinner money, the store doesn't get your shopping money, the travel company doesn't get your vacation money. Now imagine this happening on a massive scale. Everyone simultaneously decides to save more and spend less. Businesses across the economy see their revenues plummet. They respond by cutting costs, laying off workers, and reducing investment. This puts more people out of work, which reduces their income and forces them to save even more out of necessity rather than choice. The economy spirals downward. The very act of trying to save more money collectively destroys the economic activity that makes earning and saving money possible in the first place. Individual rationality creates collective irrationality. This creates a vicious cycle that can be extremely difficult to break. As people lose jobs and income, they naturally want to save more for security. But this additional saving further reduces spending, which causes more job losses, which creates more insecurity, which drives more saving. The paradox reveals a fundamental tension in economic systems. Markets depend on people spending money to function, but individuals often feel most secure when they're saving money rather than spending it. This tension becomes most visible during economic crises. When people are scared about the future, they naturally want to save more. But if everyone does this simultaneously, their collective caution can transform a minor economic slowdown into a major recession or depression. The paradox of thrift doesn't mean saving is always bad. In a healthy, growing economy, individual saving provides the capital that funds business investment and future growth. Savings become loans that allow entrepreneurs to start businesses and expand operations. The paradox applies specifically to situations where everyone suddenly increases their saving rate at the same time, usually in response to economic uncertainty. It's the simultaneous shift in behavior across the entire economy that creates the problem. This distinction is crucial for understanding when the paradox applies and when it doesn't. During normal times, encouraging people to save more might be sound advice. During economic crises, encouraging more saving might make the crisis worse. The paradox also highlights the role of expectations and confidence in economic systems. If people believe the economy will do well, they're more likely to spend money, which helps make their optimistic expectations come true. If they believe the economy will do poorly, they're more likely to save money, which can help make their pessimistic expectations come true. This creates what economists call self-fulfilling prophecies. Economic reality is partially constructed by collective beliefs and behaviors. The paradox of thrift shows how individually rational responses to uncertainty can collectively create the very outcomes people were trying to avoid. Modern economies have developed various mechanisms to deal with the paradox of thrift. When private spending collapses, governments can step in with public spending to maintain economic activity. Central banks can lower interest rates to encourage borrowing and investment rather than saving. But these solutions create their own controversies and complications. Government spending requires either higher taxes or increased debt, both of which have long-term consequences. Ultra-low interest rates can create asset bubbles and punish savers. The paradox also has profound implications for individual financial advice. Traditional wisdom says you should save more during uncertain times. But the paradox of thrift suggests that if everyone follows this advice simultaneously, it might make the uncertain times worse and last longer. This creates a moral dilemma. What do you do when individual responsibility conflicts with collective welfare? Is it ethical to continue spending during a recession to help the economy, even if it puts your own financial security at risk? The paradox reveals the limits of thinking about economics in purely individual terms. Economic systems are complex webs of interdependence, where your spending is someone else's income, your saving is someone else's lost sale, and your caution is someone else's crisis. This interconnectedness means that individual choices always have collective consequences, even when we're not aware of them. The person who decides to save money rather than go out to dinner doesn't intend to hurt restaurant workers, but the collective effect of many such decisions can destroy livelihoods. The paradox of thrift also illuminates the psychological dimensions of economic behavior. Fear and uncertainty drive people to save more, but this very behavior can create more reasons to be afraid and uncertain. Our emotions about money can create feedback loops that amplify economic volatility. Understanding this psychological dimension suggests that economic policy isn't just about numbers and incentives. It's also about managing collective emotions and expectations. Sometimes the most important economic intervention is restoring confidence rather than changing interest rates or spending levels. The paradox has particular relevance in our current era of economic uncertainty. Global events, technological disruption, and environmental challenges create ongoing reasons for people to feel cautious about spending. But if this caution becomes widespread and persistent, it could create the economic stagnation that people are trying to protect themselves against. This suggests the importance of balance in both individual decision-making and economic policy. Some saving is essential for individual security and economic growth. Too much saving, especially if it happens all at once, can undermine the economic foundations that make saving worthwhile in the first place. The paradox of thrift ultimately teaches us about the complexity of living in interconnected systems. It reminds us that individual virtue doesn't automatically translate into collective benefit. Sometimes, what feels like the responsible thing to do can contribute to outcomes that no one wants. This doesn't mean individuals should ignore their own financial security for the sake of the economy. It means we need to think more sophisticatedly about the relationship between individual actions and collective outcomes. The paradox also suggests the importance of institutions and policies that can break negative feedback loops when they develop. Social safety nets, for example, might allow people to feel secure enough to continue spending even during uncertain times. Automatic economic stabilizers can provide collective insurance against individual caution. In your personal life, the paradox of thrift offers a different way of thinking about financial decisions. Instead of asking only what's best for your individual financial situation, you might also consider the broader impact of your spending and saving choices. This doesn't mean you should spend money you don't have, or ignore your own financial security. It means recognizing that your economic choices are part of a larger system where individual and collective welfare are intertwined. The paradox reminds us that economics isn't just about money. It's about how human communities organize themselves to create and distribute the things people need and want. Individual rationality is important, but it must be balanced with an understanding of how individual choices aggregate into collective outcomes. Perhaps the deepest lesson of the paradox of thrift is that we live in systems where the whole is different from the sum of its parts. Individual wisdom doesn't automatically create collective wisdom. Sometimes it takes conscious effort and institutional design to align individual incentives with collective welfare. And that might be the most important paradox of all. That creating a society where individual responsibility leads to collective flourishing requires collective responsibility for designing systems that make individual virtue collectively beneficial. The Stockdale Paradox. Imagine you're facing the most difficult period of your life. Everything seems hopeless. The natural response would be to cling to optimism, to tell yourself that things will get better soon, to maintain hope that rescue is just around the corner. But what if this natural response, this desperate optimism, is exactly what destroys your ability to survive and ultimately thrive? This is the heart of the Stockdale Paradox, one of the most profound insights about resilience, leadership, and human endurance ever discovered. It's named after Admiral James Stockdale, a U.S. Navy officer who survived 7.5 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, enduring torture, isolation, and unimaginable hardship. When asked how he survived when others didn't, Stockdale's answer revealed a paradox that challenges everything we think we know about optimism and hope. The optimists, he said, were the ones who didn't make it. They were the ones who said, "We'll be out by Christmas," and Christmas would come and go. Then they'd say, "We'll be out by Easter," and Easter would come and go. They died of a broken heart. This seems to contradict everything we're taught about positive thinking and maintaining hope. How could optimism be destructive? How could hope become a liability? The answer reveals something profound about the difference between wishful thinking and sustainable resilience. Stockdale survived by maintaining what seems like a contradiction. He held unwavering faith that he would ultimately prevail and get out, while simultaneously confronting the brutal facts of his current reality, without any false illusions about how long it might take or how difficult it would be. This is the Stockdale Paradox, the ability to hold two seemingly opposing truths simultaneously. Complete faith in ultimate success, combined with complete honesty about current circumstances. Hope balanced with realism. Long-term optimism paired with short-term acceptance of harsh realities. The paradox reveals why pure optimism can be dangerous during genuinely difficult times. When you pin your survival on specific timelines or unrealistic expectations, you set yourself up for devastating disappointment. Each failed prediction erodes your psychological resources and makes the next challenge harder to face. The prisoners who clung to Christmas deadlines weren't just wrong about timing. They were using hope as an escape from reality rather than as fuel for endurance. Their optimism prevented them from making the mental and emotional adjustments necessary for long-term survival. In contrast, Stockdale's approach allowed him to prepare for the long haul while maintaining the motivation necessary to keep going. He could face the reality that his imprisonment might last years without giving up the belief that he would eventually prevail. This paradox has profound implications far beyond prisoner of war survival. It applies to anyone facing significant challenges, whether personal, professional, or societal. The key insight is that sustainable resilience requires balancing seemingly contradictory mindsets. Consider someone facing a serious illness. Pure optimism might lead them to ignore medical advice, skip treatments, or fail to make necessary life adjustments because they're certain they'll be cured quickly. Pure pessimism might lead them to give up entirely. The Stockdale paradox suggests a third path: complete commitment to fighting the illness while fully accepting that the process may be long, difficult, and uncertain. In business, the paradox applies to companies facing serious challenges. Leaders who paint unrealistically rosy pictures for their employees often create false hopes that damage morale when reality doesn't match the predictions. Conversely, leaders who focus only on problems without expressing confidence in eventual success can create paralyzing despair. The Stockdale approach requires leaders to be brutally honest about current challenges while maintaining and communicating genuine faith in the organization's ability to overcome them. This combination of realism and faith creates the psychological foundation for sustained effort during difficult periods. The paradox also applies to personal goals and life changes. People who rely on pure optimism often set unrealistic timelines and give up when progress is slower than expected. Those who focus only on obstacles often never start. The Stockdale approach suggests committing fully to achieving the goal while accepting that the path may be longer and more difficult than initially hoped. What makes the Stockdale paradox so powerful is that it provides a framework for maintaining motivation during extended difficulties. By separating ultimate faith from immediate expectations, it prevents the cycles of hope and disappointment that exhaust psychological resources. The paradox teaches us that hope and realism are not opposites, but partners. Real hope, the kind that sustains people through genuine adversity, must be grounded in clear-eyed assessment of current circumstances. Wishful thinking masquerading as hope often crumbles when confronted with harsh realities. This doesn't mean abandoning positive emotions or optimistic thinking. It means structuring those emotions in ways that support rather than undermine long-term resilience. The goal is not to become pessimistic, but to become realistically hopeful. The Stockdale paradox also reveals the importance of psychological flexibility during challenging times. Rigid adherence to either pure optimism or pure pessimism can become maladaptive when circumstances change. The ability to adjust expectations while maintaining core commitments allows for more effective responses to evolving situations. In relationships, the paradox suggests that both partners must be able to acknowledge problems honestly while maintaining faith in their ability to work through them together. Couples who can't discuss difficulties realistically often struggle to address them effectively. Those who lose faith in their relationship's future often give up prematurely. The paradox has particular relevance for social and political challenges. Movements for change must balance realistic assessment of current injustices with unwavering belief in the possibility of progress. Pure optimism can lead to complacency or unrealistic expectations about the pace of change. Pure pessimism can lead to despair and inaction. Understanding the Stockdale paradox can help individuals and organizations develop more sustainable approaches to advocacy and reform. The goal is to maintain motivation for long-term change while avoiding the burnout that comes from unrealistic expectations about quick fixes. The paradox also offers insights about leadership during crisis. Effective leaders during difficult times must be truth-tellers who can acknowledge harsh realities without destroying hope. They must model the paradox themselves, demonstrating both unwavering commitment and realistic assessment. This requires considerable emotional intelligence and communication skill. Leaders must learn to present difficult truths in ways that inform rather than demoralize, while expressing confidence in ways that inspire rather than mislead. Perhaps most importantly, the Stockdale paradox teaches us that true strength comes not from avoiding difficult realities, but from learning to hold them alongside hope and commitment. The ability to face facts while maintaining faith may be one of the most crucial skills for navigating an uncertain and often challenging world. The paradox reminds us that resilience is not about being tough enough to ignore problems or optimistic enough to wish them away. It's about developing the psychological sophistication to engage fully with both current challenges and future possibilities. In a world that often presents false choices between naive optimism and cynical pessimism, the Stockdale paradox offers a third way. It shows us that we can be both realistic and hopeful, both honest and faithful, both grounded in current truth and committed to future possibilities. This balance is not easy to achieve or maintain. It requires constant calibration and adjustment as circumstances change. But for those who master it, the Stockdale paradox provides a foundation for enduring the most difficult challenges, while maintaining the motivation necessary for eventual success. Admiral Stockdale's survival was not just a matter of physical endurance, but of psychological wisdom. His paradox teaches us that the mind's approach to adversity can be the difference between breaking and emerging stronger. In a world full of uncertainty and challenge, this wisdom remains as relevant today as it was in a prisoner of war camp decades ago. The hedonistic paradox. What if I told you that the harder you chase happiness, the more it will elude you? That the people most focused on being happy often end up miserable? That the very pursuit of pleasure can become a source of suffering? This is the hedonistic paradox, and it strikes at the heart of how most people think about living a good life. We assume that happiness is the ultimate goal, and that the path to happiness is to seek out as many pleasurable experiences as possible. But this assumption might be fundamentally flawed. The paradox suggests that happiness is like sleep. The more desperately you try to achieve it, the more it slips away. The more you focus on it as a goal, the less likely you are to experience it naturally. To understand why this happens, we need to examine the psychology of attention and self-consciousness. When you're constantly monitoring your happiness levels, asking yourself, am I happy? Am I having fun? Am I enjoying this? You create a psychological distance from the very experiences that could bring you joy. Imagine trying to enjoy a beautiful sunset while constantly checking whether you're enjoying it enough. The very act of self-monitoring interferes with the spontaneous appreciation that makes experiences genuinely pleasurable. This self-consciousness creates what psychologists call the observer effect. The moment you step outside an experience to evaluate it, you're no longer fully immersed in it. You become a critic of your own life rather than a participant in it. The hedonistic paradox also reveals how expectations can poison experiences. When you approach activities with the expectation that they should make you happy, you create pressure that interferes with natural enjoyment. The birthday party that should be fun becomes stressful because it's not living up to your happiness expectations. Research in positive psychology has found that people who prioritize happiness as a goal tend to be less satisfied with their lives than those who focus on other values, like meaning, relationships, or personal growth. The pursuit of happiness as an end in itself seems to be self-defeating. This doesn't mean pleasure and enjoyment are bad. It means that making them your primary focus can backfire. Happiness appears to be what philosophers call a byproduct. It emerges naturally from engaging in meaningful activities, building relationships, and pursuing goals that matter to you, but it can't be directly pursued without losing its essential quality. The paradox has profound implications for how we structure our lives and make decisions. If directly pursuing happiness doesn't work, what does? Research suggests several alternative approaches that tend to lead to greater well-being, without the self-defeating focus on happiness itself. Focusing on meaning rather than pleasure often leads to deeper satisfaction. When you're engaged in activities that feel important and worthwhile, happiness tends to emerge naturally without being pursued directly. The parent caring for a sick child, the artist working on a challenging piece, the volunteer helping others may all experience profound satisfaction that comes not from pursuing pleasure, but from pursuing purpose. Building and maintaining relationships provides another path to well-being that sidesteps the hedonic paradox. When you're focused on connecting with others, supporting them, and sharing experiences, happiness often emerges as a natural consequence of that connection. Pursuing mastery and growth in areas that matter to you can also generate deep satisfaction. The musician practicing scales isn't pursuing pleasure directly, but the gradual improvement and occasional breakthrough moments create a more lasting form of satisfaction than most hedonic pursuits. The hedonistic paradox also reveals the limitations of consumer culture, which often promises that happiness can be purchased through the right products, experiences, or lifestyle choices. The paradox suggests why these promises so often fail to deliver lasting satisfaction. When you buy something expecting it to make you happy, you're setting up the exact conditions that make happiness less likely. You're focused on the outcome rather than the experience, monitoring your happiness levels rather than engaging naturally with what you've purchased. This explains why people often feel disappointed after major purchases they expected to bring joy. The vacation that was supposed to be perfect becomes stressful because of happiness expectations. The new car loses its appeal quickly because it was purchased for its expected emotional impact rather than its practical value. The paradox suggests a different approach to consumption and experience. Instead of asking, "Will this make me happy?" you might ask, "Is this aligned with my values? Will this help me grow? Will this strengthen my relationships? Does this contribute to something meaningful?" In relationships, the hedonistic paradox warns against the dangers of happiness-focused partnership. Couples who constantly evaluate whether their relationship is making them happy often struggle more than those focused on building something together, supporting each other's growth, or working towards shared goals. The relationship becomes a vehicle for individual happiness rather than a collaborative enterprise, which ironically tends to make both partners less satisfied. The focus on individual happiness can undermine the mutual commitment and shared purpose that actually create lasting relationship satisfaction. The paradox also has implications for parenting. Parents who focus primarily on making their children happy often struggle more than those focused on helping their children develop character, resilience, and capabilities. Children who are constantly asked if they're happy may become more anxious about their emotional states rather than more satisfied. Instead of prioritizing their children's immediate happiness, parents who focus on long-term development, teaching important skills, and modeling good values often raise children who are actually happier, though happiness wasn't the direct goal. The hedonistic paradox offers profound wisdom for navigating modern life's constant pressure to optimize for happiness. Social media, advertising, and self-help culture all reinforce the idea that happiness should be your primary goal, and that if you're not happy, something is wrong. But the paradox suggests that this cultural message is not only wrong, but counterproductive. The constant pressure to be happy can make happiness more elusive and create anxiety about emotional states that would otherwise be temporary and manageable. Understanding the paradox can be liberating. It gives you permission to stop constantly monitoring your happiness levels and instead focus on activities and relationships that feel meaningful and worthwhile. It suggests that periods of struggle, boredom, or even sadness might be natural parts of life rather than problems to be immediately solved. The paradox also reframes the role of difficult experiences in a good life. Instead of seeing challenges as obstacles to happiness, you can view them as opportunities for growth, meaning-making, and deeper engagement with life. The struggles that don't feel immediately pleasurable might contribute more to long-term well-being than many purely hedonic pursuits. This doesn't mean you should avoid pleasure or ignore your emotional well-being. It means approaching them indirectly, as natural consequences of living according to your values, rather than as goals to be pursued directly. The hedonistic paradox ultimately teaches us that the good life is not about feeling good all the time. It's about engaging fully with experiences that matter, building relationships that support growth and connection, and pursuing goals that feel meaningful even when they're challenging. When you shift your focus from pursuing happiness to pursuing meaning, from monitoring your pleasure to engaging with purpose, from optimizing your mood to honoring your values, happiness often emerges naturally as a byproduct. And that happiness, because it's not the primary focus, tends to be more stable and satisfying than anything you could achieve through direct pursuit. The paradox reminds us that the most profound satisfactions in life often come not from getting what we want, but from wanting what we're doing. Not from feeling good, but from doing good. Not from pursuing happiness, but from creating conditions where happiness can flourish naturally without being chased. Catch-22. You need experience to get a job, but you need a job to get experience. You need credit history to get a loan, but you need a loan to build credit history. You need to be calm to meditate effectively, but you need to meditate to become calm. Welcome to the world of Catch-22, where the solution to your problem requires having already solved your problem. The term Catch-22 comes from Joseph Heller's brilliant novel of the same name, but the concept it describes is far older and more pervasive than any single book. It's the bureaucratic trap that snares you in impossible logic, the social paradox that keeps you running in circles, the systemic contradiction that makes progress seem impossible. In Heller's novel, the Catch-22 was a military regulation that created a perfect logical trap. Airmen could be excused from dangerous bombing missions if they were declared mentally unfit to fly. But to be declared mentally unfit, they had to request an evaluation. However, the very act of requesting to be excused from dangerous missions demonstrated rational concern for one's own safety, which proved mental fitness, which meant they couldn't be excused from flying. The genius of this trap is its circular logic. It's not that the system is broken or unfair in an obvious way. It's that the system's own rules create contradictions that make escape impossible. The Catch-22 uses logic against itself, creating a maze with no exit. These logical traps are everywhere in modern life, often hiding behind the appearance of reasonable rules and procedures. They reveal how institutions can use complexity and circular reasoning to maintain control, while appearing to offer choices and opportunities. Consider the job market's most notorious Catch-22. Entry-level positions require experience. But how do you get experience without someone giving you that first chance? This isn't an accident or oversight in hiring practices. It's often a feature that allows employers to justify hiring preferences while maintaining the fiction of fair opportunity. The credit system operates on similar principles. You need credit history to prove you're trustworthy with credit, but you need access to credit to build that history. Banks and lenders can point to these requirements as objective and reasonable, while effectively controlling who gets access to financial opportunities. Educational Catch-22s abound as well. You need to perform well on standardized tests to get into good schools, but you need access to good schools and test preparation to perform well on standardized tests. The system appears meritocratic, while actually reinforcing existing advantages. Healthcare presents some of the most tragic Catch-22 situations. You need insurance to afford medical care, but you need to be healthy enough to work to afford insurance. People with chronic illnesses often find themselves trapped between systems that each assume the other is handling their needs. The housing market creates its own Catch-22s. You need stable housing to maintain employment, but you need stable employment to afford housing. You need good credit to rent an apartment, but you need a stable address to build good credit. These aren't just individual problems. They're systemic features that maintain existing hierarchies while appearing to be neutral rules. The Catch-22 is often a mechanism of social control disguised as reasonable procedure. Mental health Catch-22s can be particularly cruel. You're told to seek help if you're struggling, but you need to be functional enough to navigate complex healthcare systems, insurance requirements, and treatment protocols to get that help. The very dysfunction that requires treatment becomes a barrier to accessing treatment. Social Catch-22s operate in more subtle ways. You need confidence to succeed socially, but you need social success to build confidence. You need experience with relationships to maintain relationships, but you need relationships to gain that experience. These paradoxes reveal something important about how social systems actually work versus how they're supposed to work. On paper, many of these systems appear fair and logical. In practice, they often create barriers that are invisible to those who don't encounter them, but insurmountable to those who do. The Catch-22 also illuminates the difference between individual and systemic solutions. When faced with these paradoxes, people are often told to work harder, be more creative, or find a way around the obstacles. But individual solutions to systemic catch-22s often require resources or privileges that not everyone has access to. The wealthy can solve the credit catch-22 by having parents co-sign loans or provide financial backing. The well-connected can solve the experience catch-22 through networking and internships. But these individual workarounds don't address the underlying structural problems that create the catch-22s in the first place. Technology has created new forms of catch-22 that earlier generations never faced. You need a smartphone to access many services and opportunities, but you need access to services and opportunities to afford a smartphone. You need digital literacy to participate fully in modern society, but you need education and resources to develop digital literacy. Platform economics has created particularly insidious catch-22s. You need ratings and reviews to succeed on many platforms, but you need success on the platform to generate ratings and reviews. Early adopters and those with existing advantages can build momentum, while newcomers face increasingly difficult barriers to entry. The gig economy promises freedom and opportunity, but often delivers catch-22s instead. You need a reliable car to work for ride-sharing services, but you need income from work to afford a reliable car. You need professional quality equipment to compete in many freelance markets, but you need income from freelancing to afford professional equipment. Understanding catch-22 dynamics can help you recognize when you're facing a systemic problem rather than a personal failing. When you feel like you're running in circles, unable to make progress despite your best efforts, you might be trapped in a catch-22 rather than lacking motivation or ability. This recognition can be both frustrating and liberating. Frustrating because it reveals that some obstacles aren't about personal inadequacy, but about structural contradictions. Liberating because it shifts focus from self-blame to understanding systems and seeking systemic solutions. When you encounter a catch-22, look for alternative pathways that circumvent the circular logic. Sometimes this means finding mentors who can provide opportunities outside normal channels. Sometimes it means starting smaller and building up gradually. Sometimes it means working with others to challenge the systems that create these traps. The catch-22 also teaches us to be skeptical of systems that claim to be fair while creating impossible barriers. When institutions describe their requirements as objective and reasonable, ask whether those requirements create circular dependencies that favor some groups over others. In your personal life, be aware of catch-22s you might be creating for yourself or others. Do you expect people to have skills before you're willing to help them develop those skills? Do you require trust before you're willing to be trustworthy? Do you demand respect before you're willing to show respect? Breaking these cycles often requires someone to take the first step without guarantees, to extend trust before it's earned, to provide opportunities before they're justified by track records. This isn't always wise or safe, but it's often necessary to break catch-22 patterns. The catch-22 paradox ultimately reveals the importance of questioning the logic of systems that govern our lives. When rules create contradictions that make progress impossible, the problem isn't with the people trying to navigate those rules, it's with the rules themselves. Perhaps the most important lesson of catch-22 is that recognizing these paradoxes is the first step toward addressing them. Once you see the circular logic that traps people, you can work to create alternative pathways, challenge unfair systems, and help others escape the maze of contradictory requirements. The catch-22 reminds us that fairness isn't just about applying rules consistently, it's about ensuring that the rules themselves don't create impossible situations. True justice requires not just procedural correctness, but substantive access to opportunity. In the end, the catch-22 is both a warning and a call to action. It warns us about the dangers of logical systems that trap people in circular reasoning. And it calls us to create better systems that provide genuine pathways to progress rather than just the illusion of opportunity. The paradox of enrichment. In the delicate balance of nature, we often assume that providing more resources leads to greater stability. Feed the prey animals better, give them more abundant food sources, and surely the entire ecosystem will thrive. The predators will have plenty to eat, the prey will multiply safely, and harmony will reign throughout the natural world. But nature has a cruel sense of irony. Sometimes our attempts to strengthen an ecosystem can trigger its complete collapse. This is the paradox of enrichment, and it reveals one of the most counterintuitive truths about complex systems. More isn't always better, and improvement can lead to destruction. The paradox was first described by ecologist Michael Rosenzweig in 1971 when he was studying mathematical models of predator-prey relationships. What he discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about how ecosystems respond to changes in resource availability. Here's how the paradox unfolds. Imagine a simple ecosystem with rabbits and foxes. The rabbits eat grass, the foxes eat rabbits, and the system exists in a delicate balance. Now suppose you dramatically increase the amount and quality of grass available to the rabbits. Logic suggests this should benefit everyone. More food for rabbits means more rabbits, which means more food for foxes. Initially, this is exactly what happens. The rabbits multiply rapidly, taking advantage of the abundant food. The fox population, seeing this opportunity, also begins to grow. But here's where the system's stability breaks down. The foxes multiply so successfully that they begin consuming rabbits faster than the rabbit population can sustain. Despite the abundant grass, the rabbit population crashes because of excessive predation. With no rabbits left to eat, the fox population then crashes as well. The very enrichment that was supposed to strengthen the ecosystem instead triggered its collapse. Where once there was a stable balance of rabbits and foxes, now there might be neither. This paradox reveals something profound about the nature of stability in complex systems. Ecosystems don't just depend on having enough resources, they depend on the relationships between different components remaining in balance. When you dramatically change one factor, even in a positive direction, you can destabilize the entire system. The paradox of enrichment applies far beyond simple predator-prey relationships. It helps explain why well-intentioned environmental interventions sometimes backfire. Efforts to help endangered species by improving their habitat can sometimes lead to population booms that exceed the environment's carrying capacity, followed by devastating crashes. The paradox also illuminates patterns in human systems. In economics, sudden influxes of wealth or resources can destabilize societies rather than strengthen them. Countries that discover valuable natural resources sometimes experience economic and political turmoil rather than prosperity, a phenomenon economists call the resource curse. The underlying mechanism is similar to what happens in the enriched ecosystem. Easy access to valuable resources can lead to rapid growth that outpaces the development of institutions and systems needed to manage that growth sustainably. The result can be boom and bust cycles that leave societies worse off than before. In organizational behavior, the paradox of enrichment manifests when companies suddenly acquire abundant resources or experience rapid growth. The influx of money and opportunities can lead to overexpansion, poor decision-making, and eventual collapse. Many businesses that seemed unstoppable during periods of rapid growth have failed precisely because they couldn't adapt to their own success. Personal finance offers another arena where the paradox appears. People who suddenly acquire wealth through inheritance, lottery winnings, or business success often struggle more than those who build wealth gradually. The rapid enrichment can disrupt established patterns of behavior and decision-making, leading to poor choices that eventually result in financial ruin. The paradox teaches us that stability often depends more on balance and adaptation than on absolute abundance. Systems that evolve gradually to handle limited resources often prove more resilient than those suddenly flooded with plenty. This insight has important implications for how we approach problems and design solutions. When trying to help struggling systems, whether ecological, economic, or social, the instinct is often to provide more resources. But the paradox of enrichment suggests that gradual, carefully managed improvements may be more effective than dramatic interventions. In education, for example, suddenly flooding struggling schools with money and resources doesn't always lead to improved outcomes. Without corresponding changes in teaching methods, administrative systems, and community support, the additional resources can be wasted or even counterproductive. Sustainable improvement often requires patient, systematic changes rather than dramatic infusions of resources. The paradox also applies to personal development and self-improvement. People who try to change too many aspects of their lives at once often experience a version of enrichment-induced instability. The sudden abundance of new habits, goals, and activities can overwhelm existing systems of self-regulation, leading to eventual abandonment of all improvements. More effective approaches to personal change often mirror successful ecosystem management. Gradual introductions of new elements, careful monitoring of system responses, and adjustments based on how the entire system adapts rather than how individual components perform. The paradox of enrichment reveals the importance of understanding systems as webs of relationships rather than collections of independent parts. In complex systems, the connections between elements are often more important than the elements themselves. Strengthening one part without considering its relationships to other parts can destabilize the entire system. This systems perspective has implications for how we think about social problems as well. Efforts to address poverty, inequality, or social dysfunction by targeting single factors often fail because they ignore the complex relationships that maintain these problems. Sustainable solutions require understanding and working with entire systems rather than isolated components. The paradox also teaches humility about human intervention in complex systems. Our intuitive understanding of how systems should respond to changes is often wrong, especially when those systems involve multiple feedback loops and non-linear relationships. Good intentions combined with system complexity can produce unintended consequences. This doesn't mean avoiding intervention in struggling systems, but rather approaching such interventions with greater caution, better monitoring, and more respect for system complexity. Sometimes the best help we can provide is gentle, gradual support that allows systems to strengthen their own internal balances rather than overwhelming them with resources they're not equipped to handle. The paradox of enrichment ultimately reminds us that stability and health in complex systems emerge from balance, adaptation, and appropriate relationships between components rather than from maximizing any single factor. Whether we're talking about ecosystems, economies, organizations, or personal lives, sustainable success often comes from working with natural balances rather than trying to overwhelm them with abundance. Understanding this paradox can transform how we approach helping others and improving systems. Instead of asking how we can provide more resources, we might ask how we can help systems develop better internal balance and greater capacity to handle changes sustainably. The lesson isn't that abundance is bad, or that we should avoid providing help to struggling systems. It's that effective help requires understanding the complex relationships that determine system stability and working to strengthen those relationships rather than simply adding more resources. In a world that often equates more with better, the paradox of enrichment stands as a reminder that wisdom lies not in maximizing individual factors, but in fostering the conditions for sustainable balance and long-term resilience. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give a system is not what it seems to need most, but what will help it maintain its own equilibrium in the face of change. The service recovery paradox. You've just had a terrible experience with a company. Your order was completely wrong, the service was awful, and you're ready to take your business elsewhere forever. But then something unexpected happens. The company doesn't just apologize, they go above and beyond to make things right. They fix the problem, give you extras to compensate for the trouble, and treat you with such care and attention that you walk away feeling better about the company than you did before anything went wrong. This is the service recovery paradox, and it reveals one of the most counterintuitive truths about customer satisfaction and human psychology. Sometimes a failure, when handled exceptionally well, can create stronger loyalty and satisfaction than if nothing had gone wrong in the first place. The paradox challenges everything we think we know about customer service and business relationships. Logic suggests that companies should focus on preventing problems to keep customers happy. But the service recovery paradox suggests that problems, when addressed properly, can actually be opportunities to strengthen customer relationships. Here's how the paradox works. When something goes wrong, customers' expectations automatically adjust downward. They expect excuses, delays, bureaucratic runarounds, and minimal effort to fix the problem. This creates an opportunity for companies to dramatically exceed these lowered expectations. When a business responds to failure with genuine care, quick action, and generous compensation, customers experience a powerful emotional contrast. They expect disappointment and instead receive delight. This unexpected positive experience can be more memorable and impactful than routine interactions where nothing goes wrong. The psychological mechanism behind the paradox involves several factors. First, there's the element of surprise. When expectations are low, due to a service failure, exceeding those expectations creates a positive surprise that triggers strong emotional responses. Second, effective service recovery demonstrates character under pressure. Anyone can provide good service when everything is going smoothly, but how a company responds to problems reveals its true values and commitment to customers. This demonstration of character can create deeper trust and emotional connection than ordinary service encounters. Third, the recovery process often involves more personal attention and communication than normal transactions. Customers receive individual attention, direct communication from managers or specialists, and customized solutions to their specific problems. This personal treatment can make customers feel valued in ways that routine service cannot. However, the service recovery paradox doesn't mean that companies should intentionally create problems to impress customers with their recovery efforts. The paradox has several important limitations and conditions that determine whether it applies. First, the recovery effort must be genuinely exceptional. Merely fixing the problem isn't enough to trigger the paradox. Companies must go significantly beyond what's required to address the failure. This might involve compensation that exceeds the customer's loss, personal attention from senior staff, or additional services that weren't part of the original purchase. Second, the failure must be relatively minor and easily fixable. Major failures that cause significant inconvenience, financial loss, or emotional distress are much less likely to result in increased satisfaction, even with excellent recovery efforts. Some problems are simply too serious to be overcome by good service recovery. Third, the customer's relationship with the company before the failure matters significantly. Customers who already have positive feelings about a company are more likely to appreciate recovery efforts and interpret them generously. New customers, or those with previous negative experiences, may be more skeptical of recovery efforts. The paradox also depends on the speed and sincerity of the recovery response. Delayed responses, even if ultimately generous, often fail to create the positive emotional impact needed for the paradox to occur. Customers need to feel that the company takes their problem seriously and acts urgently to address it. The service recovery paradox has important implications for how businesses think about quality control and customer service strategies. While preventing problems remains important, the paradox suggests that companies should also invest heavily in developing exceptional service recovery capabilities. This means training staff to handle problems with empathy and authority, empowering frontline employees to make meaningful compensation decisions, and creating systems that allow for quick identification and resolution of customer issues. Companies that excel at service recovery often perform better overall than those that focus solely on problem prevention. The paradox also applies beyond commercial customer service to personal relationships and social interactions. When someone wrongs us and then makes exceptional efforts to make amends, we often end up feeling closer to them than we did before the problem occurred. This happens because the recovery process reveals character and creates shared experiences that bond people together. Working through problems successfully can strengthen relationships by demonstrating mutual commitment and creating emotional intimacy that wouldn't have developed otherwise. In marriages and friendships, the service recovery paradox explains why some relationships become stronger after surviving conflicts or difficulties. Partners who successfully navigate problems together often report feeling more confident in their relationship and more connected to each other than couples who never face significant challenges. The key is that the recovery must be genuine, proportionate, and demonstrate real learning and growth. Simply apologizing or making superficial gestures isn't enough to trigger the positive effects of the paradox. The response must show genuine understanding of the impact of the problem and meaningful commitment to preventing similar issues in the future. Understanding the service recovery paradox can help individuals and organizations develop better approaches to handling mistakes and conflicts. Instead of viewing problems as purely negative events to be minimized, we can see them as potential opportunities to demonstrate character and strengthen relationships. This doesn't mean welcoming problems or being careless about preventing them. It means recognizing that when problems do occur, how we respond can be more important than the fact that they happened at all. Excellence in recovery can sometimes create stronger bonds than mediocrity in prevention. The paradox also teaches us about the power of exceeding expectations. In a world where people often expect poor service, genuine care and exceptional effort stand out dramatically. Companies and individuals who consistently exceed expectations during difficult situations build reputations for reliability and character that serve them well in all circumstances. Perhaps most importantly, the service recovery paradox reminds us that relationships, whether business or personal, are built not just on avoiding mistakes, but on how we handle them when they inevitably occur. The strongest relationships often emerge from successfully navigating challenges together, creating bonds forged in the fire of adversity and strengthened by mutual commitment to making things right. The stability-instability paradox. Imagine you're a general tasked with defending your nation. You have two choices: build an impenetrable defense that can withstand any attack, or develop an unstoppable weapon that can overcome any defense. Logic tells you to choose one or the other. But what if I told you that achieving perfect security at the highest level might actually make conflict more likely at lower levels? This is the stability-instability paradox, and it reveals one of the most counterintuitive truths about power, security, and conflict. The very mechanisms we use to prevent the worst outcomes can create conditions that make lesser conflicts more probable. This paradox emerged from Cold War thinking, when nuclear weapons created a bizarre form of peace between superpowers. The United States and Soviet Union possessed enough nuclear weapons to destroy civilization, yet this terrifying reality actually made direct war between them impossible. Neither side could rationally start a conflict that would end in mutual annihilation. But here's where the paradox kicks in. While nuclear weapons prevented World War III, they seemed to enable numerous smaller proxy wars. Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Central America. The superpowers fought each other indirectly, supporting opposing sides in conflicts around the world, precisely because direct confrontation was off the table. The stability at the top of the conflict ladder created instability at lower rungs. The very weapons that prevented global catastrophe enabled regional catastrophes to proliferate. This paradox reveals something profound about how power structures and deterrence systems work. When you make certain types of conflict impossible or extremely costly, you don't eliminate the underlying tensions that drive conflict. Instead, those tensions find expression through alternative channels. Think of it like water flowing downhill. Block the water's path with a dam, and it doesn't simply disappear. It builds up pressure and finds new routes, sometimes creating floods in unexpected places. Similarly, when you block one form of conflict, the underlying forces that drive conflict seek other outlets. The stability-instability paradox applies far beyond nuclear warfare. Consider cybersecurity. As organizations build stronger defenses against major cyber attacks, hackers often shift to smaller, more targeted attacks that fly under the radar of sophisticated security systems. The very security measures that prevent catastrophic breaches can enable a proliferation of minor intrusions. In international relations, the paradox continues to shape global events. The existence of nuclear weapons still prevents major powers from engaging in direct military conflict, but competition between them continues through cyber warfare, economic sanctions, proxy conflicts, and information campaigns. Even in peaceful contexts, the paradox reveals itself. Consider financial markets. Regulations designed to prevent major market crashes often create conditions for smaller, more frequent market disruptions. Deposit insurance prevents bank runs, but can encourage riskier lending practices. Too big to fail policies prevent systemic collapse, but can encourage moral hazard. The paradox also appears in organizational behavior. Companies that implement strict policies to prevent major scandals sometimes create cultures where minor ethical violations become normalized. The very controls designed to prevent big problems can create environments where small problems proliferate. In personal relationships, the stability-instability paradox can manifest in subtle but important ways. Couples who never have major fights might accumulate minor resentments that slowly erode their connection. The stability that prevents dramatic conflicts can sometimes prevent the honest communication needed to address underlying issues. Parents who shield their children from all major failures might inadvertently prevent them from developing resilience for handling minor setbacks. The protective stability creates instability in the child's ability to cope with normal life challenges. The paradox reveals a fundamental tension in how we approach security and stability. We naturally want to prevent the worst possible outcomes, but our efforts to do so can have unintended consequences that create new types of problems. This doesn't mean we should abandon efforts to create stability and security. Nuclear deterrence, for all its paradoxes, has likely prevented global catastrophe. Financial regulations, despite their limitations, have prevented many market crashes. The goal isn't to eliminate security measures, but to understand their complex effects. The key insight is that stability systems often don't eliminate underlying tensions. They redirect them. Recognizing this can help us design better systems and anticipate unintended consequences. For example, if you're implementing new security measures in your organization, the stability-instability paradox suggests you should also consider how those measures might change behavior in unexpected ways. Will preventing major security breaches create new vulnerabilities? Will strict oversight in one area lead to corner-cutting in others? The paradox also suggests the importance of managing multiple levels of stability simultaneously. Nuclear deterrence works best when it's combined with conventional military capabilities and diplomatic engagement. Cybersecurity requires both strong technical defenses and ongoing monitoring for smaller threats. In personal life, the paradox reminds us that perfect security or control is often counterproductive. Trying to eliminate all risk from your life might prevent you from taking the small risks necessary for growth and learning. Attempting to avoid all conflict in relationships might prevent the honest discussions needed for deeper intimacy. The stability-instability paradox reveals the complexity of living in interconnected systems where actions have multiple levels of consequences. What brings stability at one level can create instability at another. What prevents one type of problem can enable different types of problems. This complexity requires humility and ongoing vigilance. It means recognizing that every solution creates new challenges, every defense enables new forms of attack, and every effort to increase security changes the landscape in ways we might not anticipate. The paradox also highlights the importance of adaptive thinking. Static security measures often become counterproductive over time as adversaries, whether military, criminal, or simply competitive, adapt to work around them. Effective stability requires continuous evolution and adjustment. Perhaps most importantly, the stability-instability paradox teaches us that security is not a destination, but an ongoing process. There's no final solution that eliminates all threats and creates permanent stability. Instead, security requires constant attention to how our defensive measures shape the behavior of others and create new dynamics we need to understand and manage. In a world of increasing complexity and interconnection, this lesson becomes ever more important. The systems we build to protect ourselves inevitably change the environment in which we operate. Understanding these changes and anticipating their consequences is crucial for maintaining real security over time. The stability-instability paradox reminds us that in complex systems, the second-order effects of our actions are often more important than the first-order effects. The immediate impact of a security measure might be positive, but its long-term consequences might be more complex and require ongoing management. This perspective can transform how we approach challenges in every area of life. Instead of looking for permanent solutions, we can focus on creating adaptive systems that can evolve with changing circumstances. Instead of trying to eliminate all problems, we can focus on managing the inevitable trade-offs and unintended consequences that every solution creates. The paradox ultimately teaches us that wisdom lies not in finding perfect solutions, but in understanding the complex dynamics our solutions create and remaining vigilant about their evolving consequences. As we reach the end of this journey through the labyrinth of paradox, perhaps the most profound realization is that we've barely scratched the surface. These mind-bending contradictions aren't anomalies to be solved and discarded. They're windows into the fundamental nature of reality itself.